Good morning, everybody. Good morning and welcome to Powerful Women's Annual Conference 2024. I'm Joanna Whittington. I'm a former energy regulator and civil servant, and now I'm a board member of Powerful Women, and I am delighted to see you all here in London and to be joined online by our delegates from around the country. This bit isn't scripted, so never have I needed today more. A day to talk about increased female representation in support of the energy transition and our commitments to net zero in 2050. So, before we start, just a couple of quick housekeeping points. We want this event to be as interactive as possible, so please join in the discussions with questions and comments. And details will be given at the beginning of the two panel sessions for those online. Please check the chat. If you're on social media, please tweet and post on LinkedIn during the event, tagging Powerful Women and using the conference hashtag, which, conference hashtag, not quite sure where that is. Details are on the slide behind me. Oh, there we go. Sorry, I can now see it in front of me. With the Wi-Fi details for the room. On hearing a fire alarm or indeed any security announcement, and we're not expecting any today, please follow instructions, leaving the building by the nearest or the safest exit and assemble in Carlton Gardens to the left of the building. We have two photographers here today. If you prefer not to be photographed, or if you have any questions or requests, please speak to our event team. They're at the desk or milling round and happy to help. They and our Powerful Women ambassadors are wearing the bright pink lanyard, so easy to identify. After the conference, recordings of all today's morning sessions will be on the Powerful Women YouTube site, so please do look out for them and share with colleagues back in your organisations. And finally, a big thank you to this year's conference sponsors. There is the network password, etc. And this is the big thank you to our conference sponsors, Charles River Associates, Dalcor McLaren, Emberson Marketing, National Grid, RWE, SSE, Scottish Power, Shell, and Subsea 7. It's your generous sponsorship that helps us give practical support to the energy sector. So thank you very much. Before I start today with an update on female representation in energy, let's set the scene with a short video from Powerful Women as we celebrate our 10th anniversary.
By 2034, it would be amazing if we didn't need to have these conversations. You know, we've reached that point where women are truly represented. We don't think about a woman being a female CEO or, a female leader. We are just leaders.
The energy sector has never been as important, as interesting, and as exciting as it is now. We need every capability, every skill, and we need the brightest and the best society has to offer.
Powerful Women has achieved a huge amount in the last decade, and that is a real tribute to those who set it up, who ran it, and who supported it. But now we need to look to the next decade and what we can all do to ensure that we get a gender-balanced energy industry that can deliver the energy transition.
Brilliant. So, Powerful Women's annual conference is the forum for UK energy companies and their leaders to engage with their peers, other business sector leaders, D&I experts, and women actually working in the industry to discuss the gender diversity and inclusion issues of the day and to drive change. We have a really excellent agenda this year, and we are honoured that the Minister, Sarah Jones, is joining us to tell us about the government's approach to diversity, inclusion, talent and skills, and how it aligns with their own ambitions for the energy sector. And I'm delighted to have so many inspiring speakers in this morning's plenary from both within and outside the sector, who will share their insights and practical advice on this year's theme of Bridging the Gap to 2030, the bold and rapid actions that will drive gender equality in energy. So why do we need to identify and implement these actions, and why is it so urgent? Because while we have made great strides on female representation, and while we see leaders make genuine and visible commitments, the sad truth is that progress has halted. As you saw in our video, Powerful Women is working for a gender-balanced, diverse and inclusive energy sector. We want to see at least 40% of middle management and leadership roles in the sector held by women by 2030. This year, we've been celebrating 10 years since we were founded in 2014. I'm delighted that one of Powerful Women's co-founders, former Energy Minister Baroness Sandy Verma, is here to share her thoughts and ideas in our first panel. In that decade, we have built a huge network and voice. You'd seen 10,000 followers on LinkedIn, which the team achieved just in advance of our 10th anniversary, giving practical support to women in their careers, for example, through mentoring, and challenging companies on their female representation by sharing and encouraging good practice and publishing data to drive accountability. And there has been more than a threefold rise in the number of women on UK energy boards. Definitely something to celebrate. Today, women are in 29% of board roles, that's executive and non-executive, up from just 9% in 2015. And women now occupy 34% of leadership roles and 32% of middle management roles. But we are still lagging behind other sectors like science and tech and finance. And our analysis in this spring, in collaboration with Bain, revealed that progress has stalled, with no improvement in women on boards or women in executive director posts in 2023. Our data shows women only in 3 chair roles and 4 CEO roles across the industry. And it's astonishing in 2024 that a fifth of the top 80 UK energy companies still have no representation of females at all on their board. The good news, though, is it's fixable. We have 6 years until 2030 to meet our 40% target for women in leadership and middle management. It's a bold ambition, but it's achievable. On average, to reach 40%, each energy company needs to appoint 5 women to its leadership team over the next 6 years. That's less than 1 per year. And to meet the FTSE target for 40% women on the board by 2025, they need to add just 1 more woman to their board next year. The energy sector has always been an exciting place to work, but the transition brings additional challenges that require the very best skills, leadership and innovation. So why does diversity matter? We know that better diversity, equity and inclusion is good for business performance, talent attraction and customer engagement. On the other hand, lack of diversity leads to groupthink, less innovation and increased risk. A failure to address diversity will compromise our delivery of the energy transition. So what can we do? In July, we launched our 40 by 30 manifesto. Not the only people with a manifesto. It sets out 3 key actions that can make change happen within companies. 1, set a bold ambition for 2030 that encourages your organisation to aim high. 2, create an actionable strategy, ensuring your approach to talent supports your business strategy. And 3, employ critical enablers, including comprehensive diversity data and effective feedback loops. I encourage you all to take a look at our manifesto on our website and in today's printed programme. The manifesto includes a selection of game-changing actions that companies and individuals can take. If you are a leader or a manager, consider making your own pledges to actions that will accelerate the pace of change in the industry and benefit your business and teams at the same time. If you are an advocate, share the manifesto and work with us to drive change. Later this morning, I'm delighted that we have two distinguished panels sharing their views on what bold and rapid actions in the energy sector can be taken to meet targets and what we can learn from other sectors. We will also hear from Cordy O'Hara as new chair of our Energy Leaders Coalition, a forum created by powerful women, bringing the heads of some of the UK's largest energy employers and the energy regulators together, all committed to improving diversity in their own organisation and the sector as a whole. Cordy will report on the work in 2024 with examples of the policies and initiatives that have made a difference and where the persistent challenges still lie. And later this afternoon, for those of us here in person, we have a great selection of interactive workshops from Men for Inclusion, EDF, Emberson Marketing and Bain & Co. Thank you so much to all of them for contributing to our conference. We recognise that moving the dial on this, converting commitments into actions, is essential for a successful, equitable and affordable energy transition. Let's take today as an opportunity to learn and share and then leave with actionable strategies that get things done back in our organisations. I look forward to talking to many of you throughout the day, and in the meantime, thank you for your continued support. But now, I am really looking forward to hearing the government's perspective on this and how it fits into their own vision and plans for the energy sector. I am delighted to welcome to the stage the Minister of State for Industry at DESNZ and the Department for Business and Trade, Sarah Jones MP.
Thank you and good morning. It's such a joy to be here in a room full of so many women. I've just come from a breakfast in which I was one of only two women, which is not uncommon in my new role. And to be here in such a diverse room just makes a big difference to how I feel as a woman and how, how confident I feel that we can make the progress that we all want to see. I just want to start by thanking Powerful Women for the work that you've been doing over the last 10 years and congratulate you on the 10-year anniversary. I think what you've done has been incredible and very much to be praised, and I'm very keen to work with you in the future to make sure we continue to collaborate and work together. And before I start my remarks, I just reflect on sort of where we are in terms of the general case around equality and diversity. I think sometimes we assume that we've won arguments and that they're a given and that people will accept the argument for things like groupthink and the risks that come with without diversity in the workplace. But I don't think we can ever assume we have won those arguments or ever assume we don't have to keep making them. I think there is a basic point where we need to keep making the same arguments because otherwise we will lose them. I can remember talking to a colleague, a male MP, who we were talking about equality and diversity as just an example, and I was saying, well, there's loads of evidence about the risk of sort of groupthink if you don't have diversity, and he said, well, what's wrong with groupthink? It's good for us to be among people that we like and we work with. So we just have to keep making those arguments. So I'm really glad to be here and to help to do that. So I also wanted to talk to you sort of on a slightly personal level as a woman, obviously, today, but these issues are very close to my heart and my own political journey. I had a career outside of politics for a long time in the public and the
private and the voluntary sectors, and I was always very interested in politics. I was a member of a political party from very, very young age, but I always did that in my spare time. It wasn't my job. And I'd been a civil servant for a period working on the Olympics where I couldn't be involved in politics. You're not allowed to do that if you're a senior civil servant. And I just finished that job and was sort of looking at my next few years, and my local political party had taken the decision that the choice about who should stand for Parliament in my area in Croydon should be a woman. We had what's called all women shortlists, and it was at that point that I thought, maybe I can do this. And I am 100% sure that I actually wouldn't have thought that had it not been an all-women shortlist. Now, that's quite a strong intervention from the Labour Party, and it's not something that, you know, we could replicate in the conversations we're having here. But my own belief in my own abilities was a hindrance to me because I didn't think I could probably do it. I did do it. I got elected. I was the first female MP ever to be elected in Croydon. We'd never had one before. So that just speaks, I think, to the challenge that we all have on a personal level and a structural level that we need to try and overcome together. So I think hopefully in terms of the new government and the role that women play within that, you will have seen our ambition. And I think seeing the Chancellor as the first female Chancellor last week set out the budget is an example of that. And in the speech I'm sure you saw in the Commons, she said, to girls and young women everywhere, I say, let there be no ceiling on your ambition, your hopes and your dreams. And that ceiling, of course, is part of what we're talking about here today. And as I say, it can often exist structurally, but it can often exist also in the minds and in our own sense of what we can aspire to as women, which is why it's so essential that we lay the groundwork early on in women's careers and in schools to have that mind shift that we need to deliver, to show people that there really is no limitation on what they can achieve. I think it's so essential that we're having this conversation in the energy industry, and it's a huge sector already, and this government wants to see it grow. As you'll know, growth is our absolute number one driving force. And one of the 5 missions of this new government is to make the UK a clean energy superpower. And we want to achieve clean electricity by 2030 with a system based on renewables and nuclear power, and to use that momentum to achieve the ultimate goal of net zero by 2030. In our industrial heartlands, energy generation has long been a source of local identity and of economic growth. And by 2030, we hope that the transformation in our energy system can be a source of pride and economic growth across the whole country. But if this is to happen, it has to be for the entire country, and the job opportunities of clean energy should be spread across the UK, and it should be powered by a diverse workforce in skilled jobs. That's what drives me in my own role. I want to see people better off. I want to see people in good jobs that are well paid and that help them fulfil their potential. And to ensure more diversity in the energy industry and in all industries, I hope that you'll see this government leading by example. We have the highest number of female MPs ever in this Parliament. And of course, the Conservatives have just elected another female MP as their leader. One of the nicest WhatsApp groups I have is a female MPs WhatsApp group, where we talk about everything from big political issues to, you know, where the nearest place in Westminster is to buy a pair of tights. And it's a very, even though we have very different political views, it's an allyship. It's a powerful grouping, and I think probably the Organisation of Powerful Women does the same, where you have allies you can talk and share things with. So we want to encourage better political representation, which is important, and ensure that political parties publish diversity data through enacting Section 106 of the Equality Act. And we've introduced to Parliament the Employment Rights Bill, which will increase the baseline set of rights for employees with parental responsibilities, includes improvements to parental leave, flexible working and menopause support. We were just talking before I stood up about old sort of shift working patterns and what we need to do in that space. And I think part of that is about people's rights to talk about flexible working and talk about support they need, and part of it is about new technology enabling a shift away from those old patterns. We will expand gender pay gap reporting as well, and introduce equality action plans and strengthen dismissal protection for pregnant workers and new mothers. I think we all probably noticed during the pandemic, in particular, the Pregnant But Screwed organisations, some of these organisations that highlighted some real inequalities that we want to try and fix. So all of the measures in the Employment Rights Bill will put gender equality front and centre in our employment legislation so that we support women's employment participation in all sectors. And as I said at the start, this issue is very close to my heart. And I have to say I was quite shocked by the data on representation in the energy workforce. It was one of the early letters that I read, I think, from powerful women sending me an invitation to an event, and some of the statistics that they provided. In offshore wind and nuclear, two of the biggest contributors to our clean energy plans, as we've said, women only make up 1/5 of the workforce. Ethnic minority representation as well is an issue. In the heat pump industry, for example, it's only 5% and 7% in the construction sector. I hadn't realised that the figures were quite as bad as they are, so I'm really personally motivated to do something about this. And I think we need collaboration between industry and government and to get this done. I'm really keen, as two steps that I think I can take in the short term, to convene a group of senior energy leaders with powerful women to discuss, exactly what has been done, what can be done to improve this. And I've asked the Office for Clean Energy Jobs, which is a new part of the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, to look at the levers that government has that could potentially help with this work, so that we can drive forward action that ensures employers get the right balance in their workforce. I know that your agenda today is focused on bold and rapid actions, and your ambitions are high, and I welcome that, and I hope through the initiatives that I can bring forward, we can help in delivering the bold and rapid action that we need to see. So in your discussions today, I would just leave you with the message that the energy transition and the growth of our economy are the foundational aims of this government, and equality and equity has to be at the core of that. Today, we're not quite where we need to be. The data shows that female and ethnic minority representation in many of these growing industries is well below where it should be. But the net zero transition is a national mission. It is estimated it has the potential to create up to 725,000 jobs. And we're working to ensure that these jobs exist in all regions of the UK, so that this industry benefits from the skills and talents that exist across the country. It's a truly exciting time to work in energy, with so much investment and growth in its future. And it needs to be a time when we invest in the future of our entire workforce as well. It's not an easy task that you are championing and that we are championing, but it is a necessary one for women or ethnic minorities entering jobs in which they are typically unrepresented. It can be really daunting. To which I would say that if at times you feel a bit out of place or the odd one out, perhaps that's a sign that you're exactly where you need to be. And with that, I wish you all a very productive discussion today, and I look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the Minister for that great speech. Really interested in hearing your own career journey, but also practical suggestions about engagement for the Office for Clean Energy Jobs. Very much on message for today's conference. with that, I'm going to introduce Cordy O'Hara, our next speaker. Cordy's President of National Grid Electricity Distribution and also the incoming chair of the Energy Leaders Coalition. Cordy.
Thank you, Joanna. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see so many people in the room here, and welcome to everybody online. Before I begin, we have a short message from this year's chair of the Energy Leaders Coalition, who unfortunately can't join us today, but he has done a fantastic video for us. So, Alistair Phillips-Davies, CEO of SSE, if we can share the video.
Good morning, everyone. And I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but delighted to have been able to record this message just before the conference. I've really enjoyed the role as chair of the Energy Leaders Coalition this year, having picked up from the great groundwork delivered by Chris O'Shea in 2023. This year, we focused on learning how, as CEOs, we can best raise our advocacy to engage the majority, which in our sector remains white male employees, and to giving visibility to inspiring women who are already having a big impact. The Energy Leaders Coalition is unique. It's the only time we, as UK energy company leaders, get together on this very important topic. This year, we've seen record levels of attendance from members who've shown a real willingness to learn, with more in-depth discussions informed by external research and experience. And I'd like to thank every ELC member for their openness to learning and personal commitment that they have each brought to the meetings. We've benefited hugely from the external speakers we've invited to our meetings, providing great insights and advice on how we can grow as leaders and deliver progress. As we see from the latest diversity progress stats shared today, there remains a great deal to learn and do to reach our collective ambitions for greater gender balance, proving that inclusion and diversity is never done. It requires ongoing focus, learning, and action. I'm delighted to pass the chairmanship of the ELC to Cordy O'Hara, who I know will bring huge energy and enthusiasm, and I really value all the support she's given me this year. So have a great rest of the day, and over to you, Cordy.
Thank you, Alistair. Well, it's an absolute pleasure to address you today as the incoming chair of the Energy Leaders Coalition. And I think it is a real shame that Alistair cannot be here in person, but I did want to put it on the record our enormous thanks to the dedication that he has shown in the last year at the helm of this fabulous collaboration. And in fact, the Energy Leaders Coalition was established in 2018, and it comprises the heads of the 14 of the UK energy sector's largest employers. And between us, we represent nearly 2/3 of the industry's workforce. We're also joined by the CEOs of the energy regulator Ofgem and the North Sea Transition Authority. And as such, the collective power of this unique collaboration and coalition can act as a really powerful lever for change across the sector. We meet 5 times a year to challenge and learn from each other, share good practice and ongoing difficulties, and plan how we can leverage our collective power to influence change across the sector. And part of the way we hold ourselves to account is to try and influence positive change more widely, and by reporting annually on our work and the progress that we've made. And so I'm delighted to present the ELC's 6th annual report and to look ahead to how we address ongoing challenges, share our successes, and then accelerate change in the coming year. So let's start by looking at that data. And a key commitment from the ELC this year was to continue to communicate our progress towards targets with transparent data gathering and reporting. And this year's report shows individual ELC companies' progress to the 40% female representation on boards, in leadership, and also in middle management positions as at the end of September. Now, the first chart shows the number of women on the board and is measured against the FTSE target of 40% by 2025. 7 of our member companies have met this target already, a year early, and 3 of these are at or beyond the 50-50 gender balance on the board. The average across the whole ELC remains at 40%, which is great news, and above the sector average of 29%. As we enter the last year in the run-up to this target, there is more work to do to build on this progress and hopefully get as many ELC members beyond that 40% ambition. The second and third charts measure progress against Powerful Women's target for women to occupy at least 40% of leadership and then middle management positions in the UK energy sector by 2030. Now, we're 6 years away from this target, and already 3 ELC companies have achieved 40% for women at leadership level, which is great to see. On women in middle management, many of us are making good progress and are reporting levels in the 30s, aligned with the energy sector average. With some members reporting a slight reduction in this area over the last year, it would seem this target is the one that perhaps needs even more focus from us as we look ahead to 2030. All of us agree that it is time to accelerate the pace of change by attracting and appointing talented women into these leadership and middle management roles, and just as importantly, developing and retaining them within our sector. As well as progress against sector targets, the report also tracks our individual progress against our corporate diversity targets. And this is an important way in which we as leaders and our teams are held to account. And reporting on this publicly every year has been a major achievement of the ELC since it was established. I'm pleased that we can see ambitious corporate goals on gender diversity, with the vast majority now closely aligned to Powerful Women's 40 by 30 target. Progress towards these targets is promising in many areas, and there is recognition that building inclusion in the workplace is as important as the representation. You heard from Alistair in the video about the theme of our collaboration work this year, engaging the majority while spotlighting the minority. We know that the representation of those currently in the minority simply won't increase unless we bring the majority on the journey as advocates and deliverers of change. Throughout the year, we published monthly case studies of good practice on DEI that is having a tangible benefit within our businesses, showing the value of greater representation and inclusive workplace cultures. We also brought the outside in, hearing from some fantastic role models. Denise Wilson, former CEO of the FTSE Women's Leaders Review, on changing expectations of leadership and linking progress on diversity to the business strategy, KPIs, and remuneration. Nuala Walsh of Mind Equity on going outside of our circle to avoid familiarity bias and the value of behavioural studies. And Elliot Ray of Parenting Out Loud on how to engage men and create a cultural shift around equal parental leave, flexible working, and inclusive spaces. And we stepped up our role as ambassadors of change, starting each meeting by sharing the actions we had delivered as change makers, speaking at industry events on topics like talent, skills and diversity, and utilising our digital networks and the power of social media to showcase our activities. You can't be what you can't see, and so the second half of our focus was spotlighting the minority. We held 3 spotlight webinars that were attended by nearly 500 people to spotlight female leaders, including Leanne Russell, formerly of BP, Maya Paolucci of Engie, and Ruth Herbert, formerly CEO of the Carbon Capture and Storage Association. But we also need to make the energy sector attractive for young women to join at the start of their careers. So early in 2024, we again funded and ran our Empower Her in Energy joint marketing campaign, broadening it beyond just apprenticeships to share all vacancies in our companies that are suitable for young women. Chapter 2 of the report is probably my favourite section, where members have shared the actions that they have taken that have made a demonstrable difference to diversity, equity and inclusion over the last year. Now, from my reading of the report, there were 4 common themes that really jumped out. First of all, well thought out recruitment practices. EDF's Licence to Hire Learning programme is enhancing hiring managers' skills and addressing bias. At National Grid, our super-powered recruitment brand is showcasing women in non-traditional roles and using campaign approaches to drive diverse applications. Ørsted launched their Women in Wind training programme, with 2/3 of participants going on to full-time employment. and so Energy have transformed their CV assessment process, moving from a position where males used to occupy 70% of that final stage candidates to one where 53% of roles are being filled by women. Secondly, effective and visible leadership. 75% of Angers' leadership population has taken part in inclusive leadership training, supporting the aim to have gender-balanced succession pool. Scottish Power's Executive D&I Committee have launched a new Allies programme for senior leaders. And Subsea 7 has implemented a global view of female talent as part of their talent management process to support gender-balanced succession plans. And the third theme, capturing the right data. SSE's voluntary diversity disclosure rate increased from 20% to 65%, providing rich data and transparency on diversity metrics that can now be used to drive action. And BP has launched an expanded self-ID survey so employees can share demographic data with 42% completion rate across 38 countries in the first 12 months. And DRAX and RWE have used new DEI dashboards to gather better data and regularly monitor gender balance across all levels and regions of their business. And then finally, creating, nurturing and supportive networks. It was great to see Shell has launched targeting network events for female professionals. Wood's Equal Footing Network has been established to bring colleagues together to focus on inclusion and gender balance. And Centrica has seen real success from their Female in the Field spotlight events, sharing real-life experiences of female engineers across their organisation. This is just a taste of what has been going on in these areas, and I'm so pleased to see so many new strategies being introduced and driving improvements in workplace culture, allyship, and inclusion. It really is inspiring. Of course, these case studies aren't just being shared so we can feel good about progress, but so we can all learn from one another. And I would encourage us all to review what these organisations are doing and challenge ourselves on what we could learn from the approach. But of course, as well as sharing successes, the report highlights the common areas where members see difficulties remaining and where we need to main focus. And those include, the slow speed of change appointing women into leadership roles due to the contest for talent, slow turnover rates, and unbalanced application pools. Addressing the ongoing gender gap at middle management, making the industry attractive and supporting women through inclusive policies and culture change. Filling traditionally male-dominated and isolated field roles with talented women, and most importantly, keeping them in those roles. Engaging the majority on the value of DEI, particularly considering the growing anti-DEI sentiment and bringing the disengaged into the conversation. Addressing persistent, non-inclusive behaviours and banter, particularly in traditional male roles and locations. Gathering comprehensive data, particularly for global companies and decentralised business units. Supporting further hybrid working while still achieving employee engagement. And finally, providing greater intersectional opportunities for women and additional minorities and nurturing better cultural understanding as companies become more diverse. So let's turn to plans for next year. Our 2025 theme will be driving collaboration to maximise impact. From my perspective, the ELC is really unique in bringing together key business leaders across our sector, meeting on a regular basis to focus on a common goal. The continuity, commitment and influence of this leadership is special, and its power can be further elevated to accelerate change in our sector. In 2025, our work will focus on 3 key areas. First of all, leading change. We will further champion solutions to keep DEI challenges we have identified and increasing our visibility and influence through our own public profile, social media platforms and our own networks. Secondly, leaning further into supporting the UK net zero ambitions, aligning our activities with our critical role in the energy transition and the evolving role and need for diversity in the role that education and the skills agenda can play. And finally, maximising our collective efforts. We'll strengthen the linkages across the various initiatives that exist and drive collaboration across the sector to ensure that efforts are focused in the most effective way to deliver all of our goals and maximise the impact we need to see. We continue to value the strong relationships and support we have from the UK Government and the energy regulators, Ofgem and the North Sea Transition Authority, and they are championing diversity and inclusion of all kinds across our industry. And of course, the CEOs on the ELC, we could not achieve what we do without the expert guidance and the practical input from our D&I Lead Forum and the Powerful Women effort. And we will continue to be informed by them and draw on their support as we move forward. To close, I want to share with you all my renewed commitment to the work of the ELC. As Chair, I'll use my energy to drive progress towards our targets, to demonstrate the superpower of diversity, and to do all that we can as a coalition to better to enable representation of all kinds across the UK energy sector for a successful and fair energy transition. Now, I hope you'll enjoy reading the full report of our work this year, which can be found on the Powerful Women website, and I encourage you to read it and share it with your colleagues. I really look forward to hearing further insights and examples of good practice as we all learn from the great lineup of speakers we have coming up after the break. So please now enjoy a coffee, return back promptly at 11:15, and thank you very much.
I don't really mind because I run my own company. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Do you want some water? Thank you.
It's nice to have a full house.
Oh man. I was downstairs because I had a meeting with my lawyer this morning, and there's about 20 people downstairs in the breakout, in the kind of overflow room. Yeah. So it's really good in that regard.
Welcome back from the break. I'm Sarah McFarlane. I cover the energy transition for Thomson Reuters, and I'm here with my esteemed panel to discuss why there hasn't been more progress on gender diversity and inclusion in the energy sector, and what are some of the actions we could take to move things faster. So let me start by introducing my panel. Baroness Sandy Verma, House of Lords, who actually co-founded Powerful Women in 2014 when she was Energy Minister. Gareth Dawley, CEO of KEOE Energy Group, a private company which develops renewable energy and storage projects. Parminder Kohli, who is UK Country Chair at UK FTSE 100 company Shell. And last but not least, Claire Sharp, who is Transfer and Deconstruction Director at EDF, and also President of the Organisation of Women in Nuclear UK. So we've seen the statistics this morning. They were a little bit bleak, really, in terms of what's happened in the last 12 months. More promising if we look at what's happened in the decade since you actually launched the organisation, Baroness Verma. However, it looks like, as was said previously, things have stalled a little. If we look at the key issues, it seems like the data looked worse when it came to middle management. Not so bad at the very top with leadership roles, but it looks like there's perhaps not a clear path for women who are entering the energy industry to end up in senior leadership roles. And I wanted to start by asking the panellists what you've seen in your career in terms of barriers or long-standing issues, and the ways in which they've been tackled. Baroness Verma, I was going to start with you. I mean, you've been watching this issue closely for over a decade now. Have you seen much movement? What's really difficult to shake? What are the real barriers to progress here? And are government actions making a big difference, like the 2017 introduction of reporting gender pay gaps?
Thank you. I mean, it's quite a big question.
It is.
And I suspect everybody in the audience will probably say that there is so much more to do. Yeah, great, we've had a few small wins. But when you have a few small wins, then people who have given you the win think they've done their job. But actually, it's just the start of the process. And really what we should be looking at is, well, if we've had a small win, what do we need to do to build on it? Now, for people like me who have been around a lot longer than most of you, what I know is that leadership has always driven from the top. And if leaders buy into what needs to change, change happens. The problem, of course, is that often as not leaders, particularly in this sector when I came in, didn't know what needed to change. So I'm really, really grateful to all the CEOs who took on board that we needed change. And they came in on the journey with Powerful Women, and we celebrated 10 years. But you're right, we've sort of gone backwards a little bit. Lots of other things have been happening in the world, so minds have not been so focused. But to be quite frank, the decisions that happen at the board level impact mostly in crisis women. So when we don't take into account that impact, then we're missing out on a whole group of women, and the sector itself needs to recognise this. The consumer is king or queen or whatever else you want to align to it. So they are missing out themselves, because any organisation that will adopt and adapt will survive, and those that won't, the disruptors will come in and take on those consumers. So I think for me, I mean, look, I'm in my 60s. I've seen this debate go on and on and on and on. I was frustrated as a minister when I was in the energy department. I hope that the government now starts to refocus on the importance of why this debate needs to be at the heart of everything that threads through government, because whether it's the energy sector or the health sector, the impact is huge. So the long and the short of it is, not enough is being done. Certainly the debate has gone quiet. I want the debate to become noisy again. I want all of the people in this room to take this debate outside of the room. I don't want us to be an echo chamber. And I want us to really, really start asking the leaders in our organisations, and we've got some sitting here, what they're going to do.
Thank you. I actually was going to go to Parminder and talk a little bit about this statistic on middle management, and I think Shell is in line with the rest of the group in not meeting the 40% goal for women in middle management roles. It is exceeding on senior management, but that does imply that there's an issue with those women who are in junior roles finding a path to get to those senior roles, and whether, I think there's also a possibility that leadership could fixate on targets for leadership roles and recruit like crazy to fill those roles. That doesn't tackle retention. That doesn't tackle what the sort of succession planning is for how junior women can see a pathway for themselves.
Yeah, can I just first pick up on Baroness Verma's point around leadership in this area, because it's just important to sort of punctuate how important the role of leaders is, because when we started in 1997 in this journey as Shell, in looking at how diverse do we want to be as a company, the number of senior leaders in our company was about 4%, and today is at 38%. Yeah, and now it's stated in our Powering Progress strategy, which is the strategy which underpins how we're going to navigate the energy transition. It clearly states that Shell has an ambition to be one of the most diverse and inclusive companies in the world. So, and you saw some of the numbers this morning. Our senior women in our board position is about 43%, but more importantly, in the executive board is 57%. So all I wanted to say was that didn't come by accident. I've been with Shell 23 years, and the company completely feels different in terms of smell of the place to what I started 23 years ago and now. But that is not to say everything is fine, and Baroness Verma is correct that we can't just sit and say, oh, we achieved those numbers at the top, so job's done, because there's an issue with the frozen middle, and that our number is at a 32%, which is where rest of the sector is. So while we are over-indexed on the senior women in senior roles, but not so much in the middle. And I think there's a lot of issues which come into play talking about that, because we've been able to fix some of the entry-level intake, but it's almost like a dumbbell shape, right? You get a lot of women in, and then somehow progress stalls in the middle. And I think there we've taken some structural steps, because we recognize that's an issue. And when we do a lot of conversations with women in these positions, it's a lot about life choices and flexibility. So it's giving a lot of flexibility in work and how they do their jobs in terms of number of days at work or how they want to structure their week. But it's also about giving them a lot of coaching, mentorship support, some specific leadership programs targeted at women at middle management. But it will require structural interventions to help the women kind of progress, so that this middle does just the progress doesn't stall in the middle. But there's a lot of structural intervention, and I think that's the hardest bit in my view to crack. But we are on that journey, and I hope that we would be, by 2030 reaching that 40% number.
Thank you. And if we go to Gareth, you're obviously in a really different position with a small company. Shell has the resources to kind of put in place programs and reform interview processes, making sure their panels have additional training, that sort of thing. Interview panels, that is. And I wondered how it is for a small company tackling this issue. I imagine it's quite different.
Thank you very much, first of all, for having me and for this heavyweight panel. From a startup point of view, it's completely different, because whereas you have your structures, your matrices of people coming through, and you've got that triangle, so management at the top and people filtering through, effectively, I'm a very flat organisation, and we're very task orientated. So it's not about, are you a man, are you a woman, are you this, that, and the other. It's more of, can you get the job done? That's the only thing I'm interested in at the moment. And for us, the infrastructure around us is I don't have the luxury of the recruiter saying, can you please put sections of this type of person for all the jobs that are coming through. I need the best talent that is willing to work hard and focus on the task at hand. But for us, it's naturally come out there. So at a previous startup that I've done, we anonymized CVs. So it's just like talent-based only. That's what I want to see. Whether you can, and one of the good things that have come out of that is we had returning mothers from, like, they had small children, and they are some of the best project managers ever because they keep me in check, number one, but number two is they have a chaotic home life in terms of kids, this, that, and the other. But for me, I'm like, as long as you get the task done by this time, if you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and you want to do work then, I'm not bothered, kind of thing. It's more of you get a task done. And they love that because number one, I'm giving them the chance, not giving them the chance, they're working hard to make sure that they're in touch with their talents, but also they're contributing to a small company. So every task that they do is so powerful for me. How we've gone to our recruiters, it's more of a, I need this task done. So I don't have job titles, I just have, I need someone to manage a renewable project. Find me someone. They come back and go, this, that, and the other, and it's like, I don't want that gene pool because I don't have the money to pay to kind of take away from some of these companies here. So I need people with that skill set that can transfer into this kind of stuff. And it's super surprising that people that want to transfer into a kind of startup. Now, mine's quite a boring startup because it's just, building stuff. But the excitement for them to really react and see on a day-to-day basis of how they can deliver is phenomenal. I don't see it because I've been doing this for way too long. And when I started this journey, I had Afro and, it was all fun and games. But now we're seeing so much more diverse talent coming into the company. And it's like, actually, that's what I'm about. So, but I don't have stats. I don't have the resources to kind of have stats to go, oh, I've got 50%. Well, half of my workforce is women. I'm not kind of, oh, it's intentional. It's just more of the natural talent that's come through. And that's how I've kind of placed it. And secondly, I've actually had to start a charity to get more talent into the energy industry because you go out there and I see the same kind of CVs from the same kind of companies coming through to me all the time. I'm like, if I wanted a corporate that thinks like a corporate, I'd go to a corporate. I'm a startup, we think completely differently.
Yep.
You've got a task that is, oh, that's your job title, you do this only. No. You're going to have about 5 or 6 hats that you're going to wear on a day-to-day basis and just deal with it. And if you can't deal with it, the startup environment is not for you. So this is how I've kind of organically grown it without stats, but naturally I've got a diverse talent pool that works with me.
Thank you. And Claire, you're obviously working in the nuclear industry. I think all of the different sectors within energy are having different challenges and also different data in terms of how they're performing on equality. How is the nuclear sector going, and what difference does it make the fact that nuclear actually has a broad-based skills crisis at the moment? There hasn't been new nuclear built, hardly at all anyway, in the last few decades. So you would think that of all the parts of the energy system, nuclear might have some of the strongest incentives to be trying to bring women in.
Yeah, so just by way of context, so the nuclear sector includes obviously nuclear operations, energy generation, decommissioning, but also aspects of defence, so it's slightly broader. We've got similar ambitions, so aiming for 40% of women within the sector by 2030, 30% of senior leaders, slightly below just because it's a bigger gap to get to. In terms of where we are across the industry, it's around 20% of the population, a little bit less for senior leaders, and it's been quite stubborn there despite a lot of concerted efforts. So, the good news in the energy industry is, I'm looking at some of these figures and thinking that they're pretty good. So why is that? I mean, I think I won't go too much into the history, but you talked there about the skills challenge, and I think that's a really important point. So, there's a really exciting opportunity for nuclear. We know it is a fundamental enabler for net zero. So lots and lots of great opportunities, and I think a real purpose-led industry, which is really appealing to women as well. But we need to get that message out there. We need to make it attractive. And I think whether that is seen as an opportunity or a risk is also dependent on your own particular bias and perspective. So I see it as a huge opportunity. To meet the skills challenge, we actually need to double the recruitment into the nuclear sector every year between now and 2030. So if we just make sure that recruitment is diverse and looking at as wide a population as possible, it should be easy to hit those targets. Now, the flip side to it, which I don't subscribe to, but I know some people do, is we've got a skills challenge. We just need to recruit people. I need people really quickly. So I haven't got time to think about these diverse aspects. And I think that's the thing we've got to avoid, what I would describe as lazy recruitment. If you go out to the same recruiters with a job description that is asking for 10 to 15 years experience in the nuclear industry, perhaps, well, guess what? You're probably going to get a white man applying for that role. So those are the things we've got to look at. But I do think there's a huge opportunity. And, and we're supported in this. There's a big government initiative around Destination Nuclear, which hopefully some of you might see. There are billboards around London. There's a lot on LinkedIn. But really trying to promote nuclear as a career choice for women and girls. And also, people, mid-career transitions, returners. It's something I'm really passionate about because I know from the inside what the great opportunities are. But I didn't know about it before. I came into this industry by accident. And I kind of think, well, why are we keeping it a secret? Let's get out there and tell people. So there is an opportunity there, but a lot to do.
Thank you. I wondered whether any of you have seen any really helpful or successful initiatives that you could point to. For instance, we know that women are generally over-mentored and under-sponsored. And by this I mean mentoring is often quite a passive interaction and sponsorship is usually more active. So it's being put forward for opportunities, having a sponsor who is speaking about you highly when you're not in the room, who is helping you get promotion. It's all those sorts of opportunities. And I think historically, mentoring and sponsoring of women has often been seen as a woman's job as well. And if we look at the statistics, clearly there are more men in senior positions who could be doing that sponsorship or that mentoring. I think Ørsted did a sponsorship program where 39% of the women who participated were promoted, which they deemed a success, but I need to know what the comparative data point is on that because I only got the one data point. But anyway, there has been a lot of research on how sponsorship is more helpful than mentoring for promoting women's success in the workplace. Another example is around recruitment and promotion processes, including more measures to address inequality. SSE introduced a requirement for 25% of all candidates all candidates to be female, and all interview panels had to be diverse, and all hiring managers had to be trained in inclusive hiring. In the last year, they had 32% of new hires in the leadership group were women. That was up from 29%, so it's a very small incremental gain, but I guess what one would hope is that that will continue to grow every year. So they're just a couple of industry examples, but I wondered if anyone on the panel has some ideas they could share.
Can I just come in on the three things that have been raised already? One is we have a lot of emphasis on how we need to help women be flexible, right, in the workplace. What I want to be able to do is widen that debate to how we can enable both men and women to be flexible. Because raising a family or doing whatever outside of the workplace doesn't stop with just one gender.
Sure.
And most people, if you ask them, want to have a much more flexible environment to work in. So I think that's a debate that we need to have, and it needs to widen up across all industries. The second thing is, I was the minister responsible for decommissioning nuclear. And of course, first of all, I'm not very tall. So the outfits that I used to have to garb up in were hysterical, like Bobo the Clown. But it just demonstrated to me how little there was in actually thinking about more women coming into the sector. So I think the wider discussion is really about how do we make sure that this discussion doesn't start when you're coming towards an educational journey, but actually starts to happen when you're at the beginning of it. Because, you know, if you want people to be excited about something, I was just ticked off as a minister because I used to go to places where I was literally the only female in the room and then a person of colour. So, you know, it was quite an eye-opener for the others who had to deal with somebody who was totally not like them. So I think we've got to start changing the dialogue to be much more normalised, that if we want different people in the sector, then we've got to be able to have that conversation way, way before we get to it. I love your idea that we look at it when recruitment is on task rather than job description. I like that because I think that encompasses a lot of things that actually women are really, really good at, because you said it, we are so good at managing chaos because chaos comes from all angles. And so I think to change it, if that's an outcome that we can actually try and test out on a larger scale, I'd love to know what that looks like. Because task-based jobs and job descriptions are two totally different things. And half of the time, I know that even I've looked at a job, oh, I can't do that because I haven't got 15, 20 years. I don't need 15, 20 years. I've been on the planet long enough to know I can manage. So I think we just need to, and I just love the ideas that I've just heard because I think they are game changers.
Well, can I just build on a couple of points you mentioned and just give some practical examples from our organizations? So on this flexibility, I fully agree. It shouldn't just be expectation from one gender to take up all the burden, and that's why women need flexibility, which is why we instituted globally actually shared parental leave, 12 weeks, even in jurisdictions which we're not legally obliged to, and actually there's been a very high take-up of that and recognizing that that needs to be given across the board. So I think that I think is a great practical example. The other thing which you talked about, the language we use in terms of describing what the job is about and making it more inclusive so that many people can feel that they can fit into that, especially women. So we've looked at our job descriptions, both internally when we post a job inside, but most outside, such that it comes across and we test that to see whether that language is inclusive and appropriate, that will attract a very diverse range of people applying for that job. So I think we can be much more choiceful in the way we really challenge ourselves to say, well, do you really need that experience of 10 to 15 years sectoral experience by nature? Then you'd exclude a lot of people. So you're very right about that. And then on the sponsorship and a little bit about this mandating that, for certain roles, there'll only be women. I think I'm a bit averse to very hard targets and specifically all women kind of thing, because as a person of color myself, I wouldn't want anybody to think I got the job because of somebody wanting to fill a diversity quota. And I think most women out here would agree that nobody would want to get into a job and then somehow create that impression that they got the job because of the gender rather than their inherent capabilities. So I think what is though critical is that there is making sure there's a diverse panel, inclusive recruitment process, and making sure there is diversity in the pool of applicants, right? So we tell our line managers, you cannot bring to me an all-male shortlist. Mm-hmm. Now, you always have to have the best person for the job, but don't come to me with a very monochromatic view of what you think the person who can do the job. So those are just some examples to share.
I think just to build on that, I mean, the question you asked sort of was comparing mentoring to sponsorship. So I think, mentoring, I think kind of, sometimes starts from the premise that, right, well, we need to fix women. We need to give women more confidence so they can get on. And that's just absolute wrong, isn't it? That's not the case here. What we need to do is address the unconscious bias that is not enabling those women to reach their full potential. And mentoring may play a part in that. I think actually getting women to be mentors is a really great way I've seen, and that's some of the programs we've launched through Women in Nuclear with EDF sponsorship as well, which is it's both parts of that, but actually women realising that through their experiences, they've got a lot to give. That really helps. But I think the sponsorship, and I think it's more than that. I think it's that, you mentioned it before, Baroness Verma, in terms of that leadership from the top. So it's that relentless focus on what are we doing around our female talent and succession and development. It's really exposing it so that you are consciously thinking about those opportunities and how you get there. And I think, you know, that is something that within EDF, we have had a huge amount of focus across our senior leadership. And, you know, whilst we've still got some way to go, but actually, just to give you an example, so I talked about nuclear and the fact it's not as good, but actually, nuclear operations, part of the business I'm in, our senior leadership team, so it's about 50 of our top leaders. In 2020, 4.5% women, so there was me and probably one other at that time. We're at, I think, just about 30% now. So 4 years later, and it feels so different. So that is impressive. And, you know, and I was looking into these stats in preparation for it, and I was really shocked. And I was thinking, surely it can't have only been women. And I was thinking back, I was thinking, what about that person? I was thinking, oh no, they weren't there then, they weren't there then. So actually, it's, you know, and that's clearly enabled when you're going through transition, as we obviously are in this industry. So I think it just shows that actually it is possible. But you do need to take action. I totally agree, Parminder, with your point around, you know, nobody wants to be there as you know, a tokenism and avoiding that. But I do think actually some of those enablers, so rejecting non-diverse shortlists, which is also something we've done, ensuring, you know, nobody in EDF can recruit without having done our licence to hire training around conscious inclusion, avoiding that unconscious bias. And I think the other point that we just need to bear in mind as well, and it's echoed through a few comments already, but Sarah made it really powerfully. She wouldn't have applied to be that MP if it wasn't an all-female shortlist. So there is something about giving permission to women that actually this is okay, you have space for this. And how you do that will vary, but I think that's a really important point we shouldn't lose in that.
So I've got a kind of different take because I mentor about 20 mid to high executives throughout different types of companies. And over the last year, there's been about a 70% bias towards women that have come to me. So it's not like an official, I do this, it's more of a, they reach out to me and I'm like, right, I like your journey, what do you want to do? The challenges that they face, and this is all great because we're talking internal companies. One of the challenges I always face is external companies. So my funders, my suppliers, my, you know, all the people that do that, they have this massive unconscious bias that they see. So me as a big black guy coming to them, number one, they don't recognize me straight away and know what I need to do. But number two, it's kind of like, if I then sent someone of a different diverse background to them, would they take the mick out of them, basically? You know, going to North Scotland and send in someone in and like, well, number one, she's not English. Number two, she's a female. Number three, what does she know about that? That's something outside of my control. And but the majority of my work is external forces. But going back to the story about my sponsorship, I talk to my mentees and go, you've got real two options. Change your attitude or change your focus. Because what I'm seeing a lot of this is I wouldn't say it's an entitlement, but it's like, oh, I've been doing this, I've been here for 3 years. I was like, well, what have you done? Are you that good? You know, let's not, you know, I talked in football terms, in terms of if your work ethic's there, you're doing the stuff, you're picking up the tasks that no one else wants to do and you're going through it, then fantastic. But if you're not that good and there's other better talent, then you've got to work harder. And it's not being harsh or something, but it's like, you need to understand that you work in a triangle. You know, you've got the people at the top and the people coming through the ranks. There's not just you're guaranteed to start here and make it to the top. So it's that diverse understanding of what you need to do and where you need to do and where you need your specialism to be. And to kind of finish this point off, it's one of the most challenging things that I've seen from every person that I've been mentoring is how they adapt to that company. Because if they've gone from, say, EDF to Shell, there's a different culture there. There's a different culture here. And I always give them this one story of when I was an energy trader, my old boss, who was now my age, he was like 40 odd, he had been divorced twice, but he liked to go out, drink, and that's the whole culture. It was like, right, we all got to go drinking with him because he's the boss. And I was trying to be a professional athlete at the time, so I could go out, but I couldn't drink. When he got fired for various nefarious things, a new guy came in. And different change of culture. He was in the gym at 6 a.m. So all of a sudden you had all these people that were partying hard and work hard, play hard to actually, let's think about being healthy. So I was in the gym with him in the morning because I naturally was going. He was there and he was like, you're here again. It's just, how do you adapt to that environment? And no environment is the same, no department's the same. And it's very challenging to kind of put a stat on everything because it's a softer skills that we all have to learn as part of every company to make sure that you can advance and get through this sponsorship, mentorship kind of thing, because you may have the wrong sponsor. Sometimes you have the wrong sponsor that has got their own agenda, and if you're outshining them, and I always say to people coming into my companies, like, you leave your logos and your egos at the door. They're not wanted here. And it's hard in the different corporates because everyone's trying to corporate ladder. But from a startup perspective, let's get it done. It's about getting it done. I want to build stuff. I want to get it done. If you're on that journey with me, fantastic, and we'll work our way out on how we're going to do this, basically.
I like you.
Oh, thank you.
You and I are going to get on great. No, I think actually, there's a lot to be said in that. Culture is, of course, to individual, to each organisation. But there is a common culture. And it's that common culture that we've got to get right. So, when I was thinking about EDF, I remember my first conversation with Vincent de Rivas. And, suddenly he just got it. I had this conversation, I was at a conference and I just kept on seeing men after men after men coming on the stage. And at coffee break, I just said, Vincent, what's going on here? Where are the women? And he got up on the platform and it was then, he just said, look, it's going to change. So I think, when you actually have it pointed out to you, because sometimes it's not obvious. Sometimes you have to have the obvious pointed out. And I think when you point the obvious out, it becomes normalised. I'm going to start coughing because it's very dry in here. So if I leave the stage, it's not because I've got bored, it's because I've got a coughing fit. So I'm going to just leave you for a moment so my mascara doesn't run.
Gareth, that's an interesting point you made about how much the CEO, one individual in the company, could have a vast impact on the culture of the company that you're at. I spoke to some female leaders in the energy sector ahead of this conference, people that work on boards or are on the executive leadership team of large energy companies. And I asked them what their advice would be in terms of how they found success in the energy industry. One of the things, which I'm not sure it's the most... It didn't fill me with optimism. However, one of the things was several women said it's having either a CEO or a chairman be your sponsor, because they are the most senior person in the room, and if they are absolutely backing you to the hilt, you can't go wrong, effectively. And the other feedback was it is how men talk about women when they're not in the room. So are they putting forward women for opportunities? Are they promoting their work? Are they calling out bias when they see it in peers? And I think that is a really important point around allyship and how important that is for also enabling women's progress. I wondered whether there are any moments...
Can I just make an announcement? So the smell that you can smell is absolutely fine. There's a gentleman's
Nothing's
club,
on fire?
There's a gentleman's club next door that is burning a real fire and it's coming through the aircon. There is no fire here. They're absolutely fine. Okay, so sorry.
That's okay. That's a relief.
We need carbon capture.
So I wanted to throw it back to the panel. And ask whether there were any experiences where you wished that someone had spoken up in your career, or where perhaps you did see someone really effectively call out bias or show the right kind of culture for what you felt was supporting equality in your workplace.
Can I give a more structural answer to that, and maybe then share an anecdote? But the structural answer is that it is important that there, at least in large organizations, and I apologize up front because it's not something which works in a startup environment or might not, but I think in large organizations, we can't just leave it to individuals and what culture and what weather they want to create on a certain day. So we got to put systems in place where that you're not subjected to whims and fancies of whoever happens to be your line manager to some extent. So what we have is, a clear feedback loop. So we have annual employee survey. At the end of the year, every line manager at a very granular level has a whole range of feedback coming from their staff, anonymized, of course. Included in that is diversity and inclusion in terms of bullying. Have I been bullied and harassed at work? Am I free to be myself? Am I able to speak my mind? And these are things which are at a very individual level that each person gets who leads the organization of more than 4 people. So, and then you roll that up all the way organizationally, all the way to Shell, and we know how our D&I culture is. So all I'm saying is, while we need to stamp out, individuals who show the wrong behavior or indulge in banter and, display all the things that we would abhor, but we cannot just leave it, and that's what these systems help us find out. And these are important part of how we look at individuals' progression. So if somebody has had very poor scores in this area, that will be a conversation with that person. That person will be given enough coaching and support to fix that. But if it doesn't get fixed, not only does it impact your ability to progress in the company, it can mean even more harsher treatment than that. So I just wanted to relay that. But having said that, individuals will be individuals, and I have seen, as I said, I've seen the company change a lot, and I think you see less and less of these things. And I think it starts to happen when you're not the 4% of the population in a boardroom. When you're 40%, it doesn't happen. But it is easy when you're the lone woman in a boardroom of 12 people and you're desperately trying to fit in and ignore some of the comments which inside you feel terrible about it, but you just feel terrible about vocalizing it, or you feel unsure about it. So that has happened, but it's very important to put structures in place.
I've got again, startup world, and the reason why I've done a startup is to be in control of my own destiny. When you're at a corporate, you've got to go through the surveys, but I'll give you a real example. There's been many examples of me having personal issues with other people, with comments and how they treated me. But how I've kind of reacted is I went to a funder. I was trying to raise some money to build a power plant, a solar power plant. So they walked into the room, they were sitting there, they didn't recognise it was me, Gareth Dawley, so I was like, fine, done introduction. Then I've said I've got Caribbean heritage, so I've got a Jamaican background. So the guy tried to do a Jamaican accent, and I was like, that is the worst Irish accent I've ever heard. And I walked out the room. I was like, I don't need this. And I've done it several times now. So I actually go there and I'm going, if there's someone that doesn't look like me in the room or a bit of diversity in this room, I don't need to be here, because I know that there's other people that want my business. And my grandma, she's, rest her soul, she was what? She grew up in America, so she went through the race riots and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things she's always imparted to me is don't spend money where they don't want your money. So, and I'm very easy that if someone doesn't want to do it, I know I can find someone else. But I've got that flexibility. The corporates don't. And I've kicked people off the sites for racist or sexist jokes. I don't care. This is my company. I get to do it how I want to do. It doesn't work everywhere, but that has now had a knock-on effect. So I see graduates in the room going, thank you. I didn't think I'd have this opportunity, but I'm now understanding and learning. So, as I said, I look at it from more, not internally, because we try to be nice human beings, but more of suppliers, because a lot of my stuff is outsource heavy. Construction crew, people digging roads, people digging pipes, people putting in, it's very outsourced. So I impart that culture on my account manager and kind of their board to say, if I'm treated like this, I will cancel that contract if my lawyers will let me, and kind of do it that way. So that's how I've imparted it, but it's very hard for massive companies because you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of people, where I'm dealing with hundreds of people or tens of people. And the other thing is, as a CEO, like there's a book, Art of War, and it's basically one of the things is you can only manage 7 people or 7 departments or 7 things. So there's a lot of pressure coming through from all these different angles of, well, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. You've got to think, how many decisions have you got to make for yourself on a minute by minute basis, let alone kind of, oh, we've got to think about this bit as well. So where's the priority? And so for me, it's about getting stuff done. So it's where do you kind of put your team or the best people to kind of, right, you're one of my 7 commanders, generals, admirals kind of thing that's going to sit in this zone. You're managing that vertical, who manages that vertical. You know, how does that feed back up to you? Because otherwise, there's just an overload of information that there's not enough hours in a day to deal with it. And ultimately, for a smaller company, and most companies really, is making money. You know, all of this is, we're doing all of this just to be equal, but ultimately, if you're not profitable, no one's got a job. It's real simple, I kind of see it as.
So I think I'll give you some personal reflections on this in terms of, and you kind of pre-warned us about this, which was very useful. So my initial reaction to this was actually, I've been really fortunate in my career, and I genuinely have. I've only ever worked for male bosses, and every single one of them has supported me and, you know, helped me support. So, you know, I think it's really important to recognise that men are part of the solution here and allyship is alive and well. So my initial response was, you know, I've been really fortunate, and then actually I thought a bit more on it. It's very useful reflection. So this is many years ago now, I will say, so it doesn't impact anybody I work with today. But my first role as a senior manager, I joined a management team, and I was the only woman, the first woman on that team. And this strange thing used to happen in meetings where we'd have a conversation, and I'd put my point of view across, and then there'd be this like little awkward tumbleweed moment of silence. And then the conversation would just carry on. And sometimes what I'd said might be said again by somebody else as their idea. And I remember talking to female colleagues about this as well. And, you know, just, I really need to work on my influencing skills. And, you know, so the benefit of hindsight, what I wish is that I had just realised that this wasn't my problem. You know, and it is so well documented now. And even, you know, there's a lot about amplification, the strategies that the women in Barack Obama's team adopted to reinforce their points to just counter that unconscious bias. But it really, and you know, literally it was in the last week when I was thinking about, oh, have I got any examples? I thought, oh my God, how did I not realise that? So that is what I wish, not necessarily even that somebody had spoken up and said, yeah, that was a great point Claire made, but just that I hadn't thought it was my problem to solve.
Yeah. Baroness Verma, we were talking...
Apologies.
No, I'm glad you're better. We were talking about whether there were any personal examples in your career where you wish someone had spoken up, or perhaps you did see someone speak up and it was, you know, a relief and you could see how it influenced culture.
No.
Okay, well, that was easy.
I mean, the problem, and I think is to your point, sometimes you wait for other people to speak up for you. And so I hit 65 this year, and I'm sort of writing a little note present to myself. And the book is, you know, what would I say to myself if I was 30? Mm. And the thing is that I kept on waiting for permission. Mm. I needed somebody to give me permission, and now I just think I don't give a toss. I don't need permission. You don't need permission. To everybody here, you do not need permission. You're right. If something isn't right, it's not right. Then go and challenge it. Mm-hmm. Whether it's a startup or a corporate, the problem is this. You know, I mean, I've been a serial entrepreneur all my life. My first business at 19, and I was in the world of high fashion, but everybody who owned the business was men, right? So you have these challenges, and you were constantly put in a box. We know a little bit more than you do, dear. You're just new. But I constantly say, I'm not going out there to displace you. I just want space at the table. Just give me space at the table so that we can have a bigger table with greater ideas. Hmm. So in my reflection, I would say to you that I've spent a long time of my life thinking, should I be in this room? Should I be the first one to put up my hand and say, can I ask the stupid question that everybody else wants to ask, but nobody dares? And then when I did it once, it was like relief to me, but my God, was it relief to everybody else? Mm. So I think, look, I have a lot of emphasis on corporates because I think they do set a wider agenda. I think they are able to help the debate shift quicker. And I think for the startup world, we genuinely create the world we want. You know, I'm chair of my son's company, a renewable energy company in Africa, and we've made the promise right from the beginning that 50% of the senior management would be women. And they are. And so if you set the agenda right up front as a startup, it will go. The corporate world, the organisations that have got much more work to do but greater influence, actually it's how the leadership reports in. At every part of that business's strand, what are they doing? And where is it reported so you can see it and measure it? And I think so the dynamics of the debate can change. But you know, I just feel the conversation now needs to be much more honest. Mm-hmm. Let's just be honest about it. Yeah, it may be a block in your career at that moment in time. But guess what? If there's a block for you, then that organisation really isn't worth working for. And there are plenty of organisations that are doing absolutely the right thing. They just want the right people in the room. So I think, you know, and I'll just give you a very funny example. I was at a board meeting. It was a government board meeting, and it was lunchtime. And it was like herd mentality. The men all surrounded the sandwiches. And I'm standing there thinking, when are they going to make space? I want a sandwich too. And it was like they were having this conversation and I suddenly became invisible. And then I am afraid I had to put on my minister hat. I said, could you please move? I want my sandwich. But I think it's because they are so used to doing that, they didn't realise they were doing it. And so I'm not knocking, I'm really, really do not knock the way the environments are because they've always been like that. And the reason they won't change is if we can't help them change. And I think that's why Powerful Women was set up, so that we could help give the tools and the space to have the conversation.
I think we're going to turn it to the audience now for questions. Slight problem. I've left an iPad next to you there, Baroness Verma. Thank you. But we're also taking questions in the room. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand. I think there are roving microphones. Yes, there are. Down here. Please introduce yourself and then ask your question.
Hiya, I'm Rosie Hayes from NISO. I was just thinking, this is kind of a question to both Gareth and Parminder. Thinking about the whole skills-based approach, and I know there are probably businesses here that are looking about the skills-based structure. Is there anything that you have done or have thought about to address the unconscious bias and the institutionalised bias of how skills are developed for women and girls earlier on and in their organisation?
Well, let me first pick it up first. So while I said we don't have that much of an issue at entry level, because I mean, just an example, we're getting more than 50% graduates to be women, but there is a general problem of attracting more women to the sector. Before that, we had Energy Leaders Coalition, and that was precisely the debate. And one of the things which has been very successful, as an example, I'll just give you, that is not to say that's solution to the whole set of problems, but is to get started in terms of women in STEM. And Shell's been, for the last few decades, quite active in getting more women in, or girls in STEM. So one concrete example of that is in Scotland, we have Girls in Energy program. It's a one-year engineering course designed by North East Scotland University with Fife College. So what it does is brings 14 to 17-year-old girls in secondary schools, gives them a whole exposure, even they come and visit our facilities in St. Fergus. And that's been transformational. So about 260 girls attend that program. But we need to do a lot more of that, because if I just look at the statistics of number of women doing better in GCSEs and A-level, much better than boys are, but then why is it that we don't get that higher achieving girls to get into more STEM subjects, whereas these STEM subjects are paying a lot more? And then even if you get them into STEM subjects, why don't they come to the energy sector even more so? Because they probably got lots of choices. So I think there is a lot to be done to feed the funnel in, because that's the best way of assuring that we continue to achieve our objectives. The more high quality talent coming in would definitely move up if we put the right structures in place beyond that. So a lot more work to be done. I think we do our bit, but it's nearly not enough, and the whole sector needs to step up, in my view, in that area.
Yeah, and just to follow those comments, we don't know what we don't know. And I think as an industry, the energy industry as a whole, we are near the bottom of the rankings, because my example is I've got 2 teenage daughters. My wife, she's an interior designer that does this lovely stuff. She's on TV, she does this great stuff. And I've got me that works in a field. It's how do you attract them to go, you know what, you've got these kind of influencers and all this kind of stuff, these jobs now that not a lot of talent is making a lot of money. And then when they go through the STEM process, you've got lawyers, you've got the finance houses that are poaching them at some ridiculous wages. Mm-hmm. And what I've found is they're going through the process, they're getting disenfranchised with the kind of energy side of it, where their skill set is, because they go, I need to buy somewhere, say you live in a city, for example, London, I need to be earning this much to even get on the bottom rung of the ladder. So it's a more life choice. But then a lot of the people that I'm mentoring are kind of second jobbers that they've been worn out in the kind of legal or finance industry and want to do their first passion, which is engineering or energy. And one of the last points I wanted to make was there's lots of stuff, especially in the energy industry, that there's jobs that haven't been invented yet that we need staff for. How do you even, how do you advertise for that? How can you have 5, 10, 15 years experience? It's kind of, it's an amalgamation, as you said, it's like, you've got a skill set, make it work type of thing. And I think the reason why I've started a charity is to get more people from everywhere to get into this industry and give it a more highlight to say, we're energy, we need you for the future. Like some of my friends in my inner circle call me like a tree hugger. Because I was like, oh, well, why did you call you a tree hugger for? Well, I've tried to save the planet. I've offsetted X amount of billions of tons of carbon a year kind of thing from all my projects. But they're like, they don't see it as that thing. They kind of go to me still, like my friends go, I need the cheapest tariff. Who should I go to? I'm like, I've just built a power plant that is like 100 megawatts big. But you should go to Octopus because, they've, no, but that kind of thing is people just don't know. They're not educated enough in that industry to really push it forward, and to get the teenagers and the kind of the younger people to filter through, it is incredibly difficult. It is really, really difficult. I've seen it like firsthand. I can't tell you the stats, but when you see the kind of STEM programs that you put on, how do you keep the stickiness of you need to work hard on no money? Actually, you'll earn more at Tesco's working a minimum wage. Short-termism is just, it's always there. So there is a push, and I think we're getting to that next level, but it's going to take an industry-wide push versus just individual companies doing it.
Can I just build on that? Totally agree with you about it needing to be industry-wide. And, there's no doubt there's a real challenge with girls sticking with STEM subjects. However, I think, and in the nuclear industry in particular, we're really guilty of this. It is not all about STEM, and I think that is so important. I actually do have an M in STEM, so my degree was in philosophy and mathematics. Out of all of those disciplines, if I use any of it, it's probably the philosophy bit I use. So I think there is something about how we attract people. I love your returning mothers part of the programme. So we shouldn't allow the fact that you haven't got one of those magic letters to be a blocker that you select yourself out of the industry, because actually there's a lot of, we still need commercial skills, strategy skills, particularly with what's happening with the energy transition. Yeah. I never imagined I'd end up in the world of nuclear decommissioning. It's ridiculous in some levels. I talk about depleted uranium and things like that. Who would have ever thought that? But it just shows that you can make that transition and transfer, and I think that is the point that we need to make the industry much more accessible for people, because actually you can learn what you need to within it. We have the programmes in education, so I just want to make sure we
and
can't
start earlier.
Yes,
start early. You don't have to start at 14. 6, 7 years old, the brain is just beginning to grasp what you want to do in your life. Just make it so exciting at 6, 7. Children love creativity, and actually the nuclear sector is a really good example of that.
The woman just here on the edge. Yeah.
Hello, Aniela Foster-Turner, General Counsel, and I'm a lawyer as background. I've been in the energy space, renewable energy space, for the last 15 years. One of the struggles that I have noticed working with powerful women in engineering, the Law Society, was that in the energy transition process, yes, we worked very hard to attract the STEM profession and bring in, all of that kind of women and progression onto the profession. But one of the struggles that we have noticed was that mental health and well-being have been the main reason for attrition. People join the profession, but they leave halfway because of all of the struggles, anxiety, bullying, harassment, and so on and so forth. What is your view on that, and how can we make a difference?
So how much of an issue is culture in the energy sector, and is that really having a huge impact on retention?
I can share some, it's not like necessarily I would have stats of energy sector in terms of mental health cases versus other sectors, but I think, the world's just more challenging. We're dealing with more and more information, and it seems like life is tougher post-COVID. We had to balance many things, and I think post-COVID we've definitely seen increase in mental health issues across the board, right? I think it was just a stressful period, and we are going, as an organization, the whole industry is going through a big change, and that sort of constant change does induce stress. We just had Mental Health Awareness Day, the Global Mental Health Awareness Day, a lot of programs around educating leaders to talk about it's okay to talk about it, right? So it's okay to say I'm not okay. And that starts with creating a bit of a culture where you can open up, and that is every line manager's responsibility to ensure that they give the space, and if somebody needs time to give them the space. So we're doing a lot to create a bit of that culture within the organization. But having said that, we see more and more cases of this coming up, and it's a real pressure point. What I can't say is that unique to our sector or broadly felt by the society at large, I'd say.
I've been affected firsthand in terms of I've had some of my employees have, post-COVID mental health issues. And for a smaller company, it's really, really tough because they are a vital pillar of our organisation. So to lose that skill set, it's like we don't have the backup of we've got someone, an undergraduate or someone there. So it's kind of how to replace that skill. Now, there's lots of stuff that we can do, but it's a very individual type of area to kind of go into. But in terms of the bullying, because I want to say I've experienced bullies, but it's more of I've had lots of diversity within the workplace that the less gentleman in me would do something more physical to that person, and that's acting on behalf of someone else. But I think it's that one of, if it's not reported as well, we don't know what we don't know, and it's a very tough one. So at an old company, I'm not going to mention a name because it may be going through a legal case, like there was this thing of bullying of a certain particular person, and it was like, we didn't know about it until it came out, and we're like, there was no signs, there was no nothing, so it kind of sat in silence. How do you deal with that? Disciplinary, blah, blah, blah. But then it gets into a fractured internal structure. But ultimately, the right result happened. The person that was the bullier was let go for various reasons, and they're now suing that company for unfair dismissal. But at the time, it was the right thing to do. But I said, these are such individual cases, and if your voice is not heard and if you've got no one to go to, then it's a very sad situation. But as soon as it is highlighted, you can clamp, well, for us, as me as a company, we clamp down on it. But the structure that we've built, we don't feel that there is that bullying culture there because we're quite small. It's a flat structure. So, and it would come up very quickly that if person A and person B are having some sort of conflict, you kind of know it back straight away. Whereas in a larger corporate, it could get hidden for years.
So I think I'd like to talk about a culture of inclusion and psychological safety. That's why we strive for diversity. That's why we want gender balance, because, not just because it's the right thing to do, but we know lots and lots of research tells us you get better performance from diverse teams. But you only get that performance when people feel safe to share their unique gifts, their perspectives, to have their voice. So I think that is the thing. You can't just focus on the diversity statistic. Are we recruiting enough people in without the culture matching so that they feel safe? And, mental health is one aspect, but, so is, leaving. If you're recruiting women in, but you've got as many leaving at the same time, well, you're never going to get what you need from it. So I think that is the core of this. I think with mental health, we're talking about women in this industry. I think it's really important to recognise that there are particular challenges for men around mental health, and I think that's a way to engage that wider majority audience in this as well, to give them a seat at the table and recognise some of the challenges. But I think just to focus on women in that aspect, there are particular challenges. Women are generally doing a higher proportion of caring responsibilities, whether that's for children or for elderly parents. They're potentially dealing with imposter syndrome and some of those other challenges, maybe ignoring some of the microaggressions within it. So there is, I think, lots of factors that can lead to that kind of stress burnout. So I think that is part of it. But I think we also, if we're talking about mental health, we can't ignore the fact that there's a really big challenge for men as well, which we all need to be aware of.
We've become less communicative with each other. The problem is we are now run by machinery rather than having a conversation with people. I'm often surprised at how many people, they think they've got something wrong, they go and Google it. For crying out aloud, just go and talk to somebody. But I think the problem is we've actually lost the skill of sharing and talking, and sometimes, and it is for men and women. And I think we've got to create a culture of work where it's okay over a coffee to say, do you know what? In the old days, I don't know what we called it, but, we'd be around the coffee machine. We can't even do that now because they might hack your phone from it. but the thing is, though, you did have that conversation. Now, women's journeys are very different to men's journeys. So we need to start understanding the different points in a person's journey. We all talk about childcare, then you get to another care, then you get to another care, then you get to another care. And all of those are big pieces in your life that nobody really wants to talk about. When I hit the menopause, I thought, good God, the whole world is heating up, right? But everybody else around me is cold. So I insisted on talking to people around me and saying, look, this is what I'm going through. So if I need the window open and it's freezing outside, you put a jumper on, because I'm hot. But I think having the conversation, not making it difficult for people. Let's not make conversations difficult. Let's try and have an open conversation, be it a large organisation or a small one. And let's remember that in a life journey, men and women are going to go through there are difficult pinch points in your life, whether you like them or not. And I think we've just got to start having that much more wider conversation. COVID did one thing. COVID made us recognise that sometimes when you're feeling pretty crap, it was okay to do so. And I could actually pick up the phone and speak to my boss and say, I don't want to come in today because I'm feeling a little bit not quite there. And I think that conversation is now beginning to, and I think we should embrace it, not see it as a weakness. Let's not see anything as a weakness anymore and hide behind it, because it doesn't help anybody else either.
One of the questions that's come in online, sorry, I know there's lots of questions in the room as well, was just on the back of what you were saying, Baroness Verma. Does hybrid working help or hinder diversity and inclusion? And it sounds like you could argue either.
Yeah.
All right, let's go back to the room then. Okay, one last question. Oh, this lady in the cream top here.
Hi, I'm Nicola Hamilton. I'm Head of Corporate Affairs at NG. Oh, sorry.
Hi, I'm Nicola Hamilton. I'm Head of Corporate Affairs at NG UK. I've just joined the UK country management team, so I've made that step up from sort of middle manager to executive team, so that's quite a recent thing for me. Great panel, by the way, one of the best I've heard for ages, thank you. I was just reflecting on some of the things that you said about the conditions that particularly women in middle management need to thrive. And I was wondering, do any of you or your organisations have you actually kind of polled women and done work and actually said, women, what are the conditions that you need to make that next step? Because in a practical sense, I'm thinking, when you're at a senior manager level as opposed to on an exec team, you might not have the salary to be able to afford like a nanny or childcare or a HelloFresh delivery that means that you haven't got to worry about going home and cooking. And I don't know, like maybe ways of dressing or, you know, ways of building confidence that you might not have. And I just wondered that if there was something that we could do as an industry to kind of say, you know, right, okay, as part of a development program, we're going to offer you some HelloFresh vouchers, or we're going to do this or do that. Like, because I think things have moved on a bit.
So can I? So I think I'd start by kind of turning it round, because I think where you're starting from there is actually I'm looking at all these things I need to have to do that position, whereas I think actually it's about switching it. So actually, no, you work the hours that are reasonable for you. So it's, I think a lot of it is around role modelling how those roles can be done in a variety of ways, in flexibility, and thinking about, so I think, you know, that is actually about the culture and mindset of the organisation. So you're thinking about how do we make sure we are being inclusive. So just to give you a really simple example, we do awards for our employees every year. So it's like a really nice celebratory event, and it's quite glitzy. And if you want to wear a black tie, that's fine, but you do not have to, because we know not everybody can afford to do that. So it's those types of things. To answer the actual question you asked, though, so we haven't polled specifically in EDF around that particular question. What we have done is spent a lot of time in deep listening sessions, focus groups, not just with women, but with men as well. And I think, you know, you get survey data, but I think the qualitative data you get from those in-depth conversations is absolutely vital. And if you're not doing that, you absolutely need to, because that will tell you what the genuine lived experience is of those groups of people and help you understand how to engage them. And that's been one of the things that's been very helpful for us, particularly where we're sort of at the journey now, is to actually, we need to engage our men in allyship. So how do we do that? And that's been really helpful to us to engage them.
I'll just add a perspective, which is to say, well, it's very hard to generalize, or this is what women want in middle management to progress, because I think every situation is different, but it starts with an honest conversation of what this person needs. And it can be surfaced in many ways, you know, honest conversation with your line manager, and we're training a lot of the line managers to have these kind of conversation, development discussions. But also we have a very thriving, we call it Balance Network, which is the women's network, where there's a lot of, you know, other senior women talking. So you get surface out these issues, and then you address them, you know, where it needs to be addressed in some way. So rather than saying, oh, here's what we're going to offer all our middle management to kind of help them progress. But it does require that to be a serious focus of attention, and that's what we're doing with multitude of actions, rather than saying there's a silver bullet which will help move this, what I call the frozen middle in some ways. Yeah.
That we are, as an industry, we're not Google. We're not kind of the ones that can incentivize all of that kind of stuff. It doesn't work that way. How I work at a startup is when I'm doing the interview, I go, what do you want to achieve in life? Do you want to buy a house? Do you want to do this? That's your timeline. How much money do you need to get to that timeline? And then go, right, let's reverse engineer it. And get that person in the interview to reverse engineer it, going, right, you need to do this by this time to do this. That's your goal. So if we hit this target, you get this much. That means I've shortened your lifespan to hit that target. What's your next target? So that's the interview process. So you're coming into the company with an expectation of what you want to do. Because we don't have a traditional leadership team of stuff, it's like, this is literally, the goal is whatever you want it to be, can be your role. If you want to be head of a department, if you want to be running this company, it is down to you to do it. So I see it from a different perspective. And then, and for the little things, so is any tax people in here, or HMRC, because I'm not going to disclose this officially. Cash bonuses. You know, you don't believe like how a £50 or £500 cash bonus just of a Friday because everyone's done well goes down amazingly, because that gets you a takeaway, that gets you whatever you need to do. But it's those little tangible assets that these companies can't do that I can and I shouldn't do, but the taxman's not here. So that really help kind of keep people motivated. I'm going to retract that whole statement now, okay? I realise it's on the web and everything, so...
I'm going to have to...
It's not KOE, it's EOK,
yeah. You've shut the panel down. I am going to have to wrap it up. Thank you so much. I'm really sorry we didn't get to all the questions in the audience. We covered so many great practical bits of advice there around task-based job descriptions, using inclusive language, how important flexibility is, how important it is to consistently have this on the management agenda, how leaders need to call out things as they see them to set an example for what is acceptable within their company culture. I think I've just got to stop talking. Thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists.
Champagne. Oh God, it feels a bit... Hello. Hello. Right. How are you? Nice to meet you. I'm Jen. Nice to meet you. Sorry, I didn't get to meet anyone. Perfect. Thank you. Are these fresh glasses? No, those are used.
That's why I bought the cup. That's a fresh glass.
That's a...
Yeah. That
yeah,
one.
that's not...
That one.
Yeah. So...
That's mine. That's mine.
You can have this one.
Oh, thank you.
I'll... Oh yeah, I think she's going to bring...
Would you have one more fresh glass? Mine not starting with me. I won't start with you. We'll start next to me. Okay.
I'll have a bit bouncy on this stage.
Thank you.
Isn't it?
So your mics will go on any second.
Hello. All right.
Start with you. Go down the line.
That's nice. You can just rock up and you know what you took it up in like sleepless nights and everything. You know, it's like bloody hell.
I have just been planning. So I got to this meeting, all of you.
Yeah. Your PA was on, wasn't it?
No, she runs our events and our conferences, so she manages all of our engagements.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our second panel session, which is around insights from outside the energy sector. No, you can't hear me now? Can you hear me?
Hello.
Yes. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Actually, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Good morning, everybody. Insights from the outside of the energy sector is our second panel session today. Having heard from what the energy sector's got right, what it still needs to do more of, and what it's not going so well, we've now got the opportunity to speak to a number of colleagues, leaders in their sector, with a focus on policing, healthcare, emergency medicine, mining and railways. So some commonality, but some also big differences with our sector. I'm going to start by asking my colleagues, the panellists, if they'll just do a brief introduction of themselves, their organisation, their sectors, and perhaps a little bit about their journey and how they think their sector is doing.
Okay.
Do you want to start? Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Karen Squires. Scared and excited in equal measure. So I'm a consultant in emergency medicine and I work in Liverpool. I'm a full-time working mother of two. I am a fellow of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine and I also sit on the Royal College of Emergency Medicine Gender Equity Committee. Emergency medicine is quite a young specialty in kind of clinical terms. We've only been going for about 50 years or so. And it's a 24/7 full-time high-pressured environment. Agility, flexibility, change, that's what we do, basically. That's the nature of the job. And as a Royal College, we embrace change and we're quite progressive in terms of how kind of clinical medicine is perceived. Because we're quite young, we're less bound by the constraints of more traditional medicine, if you like, and those kind of unwritten rules.
So we tend to be quite progressive. The Royal College of Emergency Medicine is our professional body, and they of late have introduced a Gender Equity Committee, Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and also a Sustainable Working Practices Committee. And we're all there to kind of sense check the guidance and the policy that we deliver to our members. We're also there to promote diversity and equality, and also challenge the board on decisions that they're making to make sure that it is actually right for the people that they serve. So we work within the framework of the NHS, which prouds itself on being an inclusive and diverse employer. It's an equitable employer. It freely advertises these values. However, in 2020, there was a paper produced by the Department of Health and Social Care called Mend the Gap, and it basically highlighted massive pay disparity between gender of clinicians, of doctors, between men and women. And it's an enormous 300-page document, which I won't bore you with the gory details of, but effectively it comes down to about 20%, more or less, for different types of doctor. So that's massive when you consider that we actually work for an inclusive and equitable employer. The problems highlighted in the paper basically fell into three categories. One is women tend to work less than full-time. They also meet a kind of stalled progress when it comes to their promotion into leadership positions. And also there's a problem with additional payments and recognition for work that they do outside of their normal job. Personally, I've conducted my own research within my own trust regarding the enablers and limiting factors into leadership. So this is a topic I'm quite passionate about myself. So from an emergency medicine point of view, we've done quite a lot of work, and we've actually pioneered work with Health Education England in the Northwest. And we were the pioneers of a project to enable and try and kind of understand this less than full-time working, because as has been highlighted by the panel before, you know, being a parent is not gender specific. So what we've done, which has been hugely successful, is so basically less than full-time working. You could apply to work as a less than full-time doctor, but that basically you had to fit a criteria of having had a child or have caring responsibilities, and predominantly it was women who were fitted the box, who could tick the box, who could apply. Hence the reason that's what they did. And so what Health Education England did is that they basically just annihilated those criteria and they opened it up. You still have to fit a criteria, but you can pretty much come up with an excuse and you can do it. So, you know, whether it's for health and well-being, whether it's to care for your pets, whether it's whatever it is, and that's been massive and actually changing the dialogue. So at the last count for postgraduate doctors in training, which are basically registrars, pre-consultants, the last count was 75% of them in the Northwest actually work 80%, and that is a pretty much 50-50 gender split between men and women, which is enormous. So what it's done is made a massive impact on normalising less than full-time work. I could talk for hours, but I won't, because there's other people. But yeah, does that?
Well, it's
a good
really
place to start?
an excellent place to start with such a positive and tangible example of something that could be adopted in the energy sector to make that difference. Great, Jennifer, do you want to?
So I work for the Met Police, probably not a quite positive, probably not to boo me off the stage. So I'm an inspector in the Met Police. I've been a frontline police officer for nearly 17 years. I'm the officer chair of our network of women, so our Women's Staff Association. I sit on the British Association of Women in Policing, and I'm also the national lead for perinatal mental health in policing, following my own experiences. Policing, anyone in policing can get flexible working. So that's a really positive part of our thing. We've got fantastic policies in place. Obviously, it's very different. The UK is made up of 43 different forces, all with differing policies for different things. But anyone can access flexible working, and we've got fantastic maternity leave packages and things. Paternity leave, as probably in most sectors, is still dragging behind, but there's still fantastic work being done around that. In England and Wales, 35% of the workforce are female. Sadly, only 6% of them are from minority backgrounds. We have one female chief officer, Dr. Alison Hadari, who's absolutely amazing. She's doing all of these amazing things about the race action plan. We have got more chief constables who are female now, more than ever, which is again really positive. I don't have to tell you, you've only got to turn on the news, that in policing it's a culture problem. We have huge culture problems. But slowly but surely those things are coming through. But we're doing fantastic work, as I said, around, I know they talked about it in the last panel and earlier on, around supporting the other half of parenting journeys. My husband's in the job, and quite often, I've got 4 very young children, all boys. And quite often, if there is a need for one of us to have time off, there has been occasions when my husband has gone to ask for the time off, and it's been very much, well, can Jen not do that? What is Jen not available to do that? So, those things still happen. There's still issues in policing in general around part-time work. Those conversations around whether people can have a course. Can you have a course? You're part-time. What does part-time look like? I was part-time in various different, but at one point I was 97%. So, that's still classed as part-time, but, I was still, Jen's part-time. So, who maybe the full-time person might get that. Those conversations still happen. But, we are doing some really fantastic work in police in general. The British Association of Women in Policing, we do a lot of digging into forces and things. Obviously, I'm sure most of you'll know about the Baroness Casey review. Lots of things came up from that. There was the Angelini inquiry, which obviously brought up some things about one of their recommendations around supporting parents in policing. So there is a long way to go, but I'm sure, we can learn as much from you as you can learn from us, because we are getting some things right as well.
Excellent. So that was really interesting, Kieran. Perhaps we'll come back and talk a little bit more about the sort of cultural change and how you instigate cultural change on the front line. 'Cause I'm sure a lot's happening there. Perhaps.
Yes, so my name is Stacey Hope. I am a partner in a sustainability consultancy firm called ERM, but that's not the interesting part of the story. I run an organization called Women in Mining UK. I've been with the organization for about 11 years, and I remembered when someone first introduced me to WIM UK, as we call it, I said, they're women in mining, which is what I often get when I introduce myself now. But my organization is not as ambitious, I think, as the energy sector, but I think that's just reflective of mining. We're not looking at a 40% gender, women in the industry. We're actually looking at 30%. And that's mainly because 8 to 17%, our ratio at the moment is 8 to 17% of women in the industry. And that discrepancy between 8 to 17 is because we also include artisanal and small-scale miners. It's a very different world to energy, but still very relevant to the energy sector, especially energy transition. We focus within Women in Mining from, I want to say, cradle to retirement, not grave. We're not that, that dark. So from childhood to actually those who are outside of the sector, having retired, how do we bring them back into industry to be a part of an advisory or a talent pool that can add value to the younger generations coming forward? But we have about 17.6% of women on boards at the moment, which is actually really good for us. We did a study in 2012 where we had 4.9% of women in the industry sitting in board positions, and we had 1 chairwoman. Today we have 11 chairwomen sitting on boards, but we have that increase at 17.9% or 17.6%. It's not great, but it's better, which is always good. So we're striving for more, and we have a lot of programs, which I know you'll have lots of questions around them. but we try to touch across young people to people on boards, mainly because we have a talent problem, but we actually just have a pipeline problem. We don't have many young people interested in the industry because mining is seen as a dirty industry, and there are lots of things that contribute towards that, especially because of the culture in which mining exists. It's mostly shift work for the majority of the workforce, which means you could be on site for 4 weeks and then off site for another 6 weeks. Sometimes it's much longer than that. And the issues around how do you manage work life and personal life becomes a really big factor as to some of the deterrents. But culture is, I'd say, one of the major contributors to why we have these low numbers of women in the industry, and having women visible is one of the things that we try to strive towards. It's part of the reason why this year, every 2 years, we run something called the 100 Global Inspirational Women in Mining Initiative. This is a WIM 100 year. So in November, we'll have hopefully close to 100 women coming to London to be recognized from around the world for their achievements in mining, which is one of the issues that we tend to neglect. If young people, especially young women, don't see a lot of women in mining, then like me, they say, I didn't know women are in mining. Hence why this is a very important initiative. And my colleague gave me a little prop. I hate using props, but this is from 2022, so we do it every 2 years, and this year we'll have our WIM 100 initiative again. But so much to talk about. Brief introduction. And despite my accent, I'm not American, so please do not speak to me about the American election. I'm still traumatized. I'm from Guyana.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah, I'll make sure I don't say that later.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Stacey, very much for that introduction. That was really interesting. Perhaps we can come back and pick up on some of those points, particularly the sort of the change you've managed to make around the number of women on boards. Sharon, do you want to give us an introduction?
Yeah, hi. So I'm here to represent the rail industry. So I'm going to have like 2 hats on today to remember Network Rail, who I work for, and sit on the board for Women in Rail as a trustee. So for Network Rail, it's probably very similar to the engineering company in as much as the energy company rather, as much as that we've got very old assets that need to be renewed. And we have operational staff as well as corporate staff. And for women, that is very low represented, as we've all been, that's why we're all here today, to have the discussion. But I managed to get some stats on the industry as a whole, which I'm going to share with you. And these stats have come from NSAR, which is the National Skills Academy for Rail. So I thought I'd make sure I write that down in case someone asks me what was that acronym for. But anyway, the proportion of women in the rail sector has gradually been increasing. So currently, it was 14.6% in 2022 and rose to 16.3% in 2023. And the latest figures are now showing, but these have not been published yet, but I've been given the opportunity to be able to say these today, that it's risen to 17.4%. So there's that gradual increase, but I know it's very small, but I always see that as a positive, which is really great. So within Network Rail, as I've said to you before, you know, we have our operational staff and our corporate staff. I work in the corporate environment, so I work in the offices. My journey throughout Network Rail has been working with the employee networks to increase diversity and inclusion within the organisation. So I've been with employee networks for the last 10 years. That's how I've got my MBE for the efforts that I've put in diversity and inclusion. And, you know, gradually I've seen the organisation change where we have been able to talk freely about the things that affect us, not only as women, but also as black women. And the gradual change in having that acceptance has been really positive, but there's still a lot of things that we need to do within the organisation. Now, Women in Rail was a great opportunity to galvanise all of that information and put it under one umbrella. And Women in Rail do some great things. With 7,500 members, we're able to reach out to those members and share good practice and ideas. We've done phenomenal stuff on, and working with Network Rail, phenomenal stuff on menopause, looking at flexible working, looking at how we empower women, looking at mentoring scheme. I mean, I've got stats coming out my ear holes where this has actually worked really well. And it was interesting about the discussion around sponsorship that we were talking about earlier on. And I'd like to sort of explore that. But our mentorship program has been really successful with nearly, this is in Women in Rail, with nearly 16,000 applicants and with 42 organisations. I'm trying to remember my stats, you know, I've written it down, so I'm doing all right so far. And with 41% from our cohort in 2023 saying that they were empowered from that experience and were able to go on to be promoted in their roles. And so with Women in Rail hat on and Network Rail hat on, we're working together to obviously move the dial in that space. A long way to go, but I can see some positive strides, and we are going to talk later on about some of those initiatives that have done to try and make the environment more inclusive for our women, and how we can empower our women to become better managers. But again, at exec level, at Network Rail, it's only 1%. So we've still got quite a long way to go.
So thank you so much, everybody, for that introduction. Really helpful to know that energy isn't on its own. If we dig down at a bit more granular level, it sounds like we've all made different attempts to improve the lived experience of women in these sectors, but also to actively increase representation. Thinking about your own organisations and sectors, what do you think has worked best, and where have you been able to actually drive change? Stacey, you mentioned in your introduction that you'd gone from a tiny number of people on boards to 11 female chairs. What do you think, were there specific policies and processes that sat around behind that, or was it a sort of softer cultural change that drove it?
I think there's a combination. So we, although we're Women in Mining UK, we're quite connected to the global mining sector, mainly because we don't do much mining in the UK. Hence, the UK is seen as the hub for finance and for litigations or arbitrations for mining. So we have a very global lens, and we tend to work a lot and share some lessons learned as to why we have such an increase. So for example, in Canada, and mind you, we have women on boards, but it could be a UK company and you'll have a woman from India, South Africa, Canada sitting on the board, hence why the more global lens. So Canada, from 2012 to 2022, increased their board representation of women for the top 100 companies, and I'm trying to remember my stats now, from 3% to 31.7% in 10 years. And that's mostly driven by investors. So the investors have adopted a 30% club view that they will not invest in companies that do not at least show promise to have about 30% representation on boards of women. So you have that on the one hand. South Africa leads the pack because they have certain legislations that enable better board representation and representation of women across the board. So they have the, and I will remember this at some point, historically disadvantaged South African policy, as well as the Women in Mining policy that's driven by the Mineral Council in South Africa to ensure that there's a certain percentage of women. So you have about 40.6%, and they've met critical mass of 30% in the industry of women on boards for top 100 companies. And these are, and they do a lot around the intersectional representation, because we have women on boards, but then we have the other, right? So we have women on boards who are, who represent persons with disabilities, who represent minority groups, et cetera. So it's looking at a concerted effort around policies, yes, around how do we push the industry to look towards this change, but then we have the cultural part. And I mentioned earlier that we also have the issue of the number of women coming into the industry, and I think you'll hear across today the number of women that stay in the industry. What are the retention opportunities? So at Women in Mining UK, we do a lot around scholarships and a lot around internships. There's another organization that focuses on mentorship, so we like to give space to other initiatives so that they can build and grow. Our internships are very successful because more than, I'd say, 60% of our interns land jobs afterwards. And this is across the world, from Canada to Ghana to the UK to the US. Our internships that come through Women in Mining UK show promise that women can enter the industry, but then we work with companies around, well, what are your internal policies? And mostly, what does your culture look like? I think the previous moderator, or maybe someone on the panel, talked about the culture. Oh, and actually, I think it was Baroness Verma who said, there's one culture. For me, that one culture is respectful workplace culture. I think when you can define what respectful workplace culture looks like, then you are incentivized to have more women, more representation of diverse backgrounds across the board. And then you have more impetus for women to stay in those industries. We don't often talk about respectful workplace culture, and I think that's one of the things that we need to maybe hone in a bit more. So that's the space that we work in. It's really about breaking down those barriers because it is a tough one with mining. I can't speak to energy, but yeah, let's see how it goes.
Thank you very much, Stacey. Well, perhaps we can pick up that point about culture and cultural change and being respectful, and go to Jennifer to talk about what's happening in policing.
So it's really difficult. I mean, obviously it is a male-dominated profession, but we are seeing more women coming up, and with that, women are becoming more senior. And in policing, there's a difference between, you can be a senior PC, for example, on a response team. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're an inspector, chief superintendent. So we're seeing women staying a bit longer, and that's certainly impacting cultures on, they say that there are problematic areas in policing. You'll see it on the news, the firearms side of things, or the response team policing, and they are predominantly male sort of full of them, basically. It's hardly any women in firearms, but that is moving on. And actually the women who are going into these firearms teams now, they're saying, well, look, I need this support when I come back from having a baby, because there are certain levels of fitness, there are very different levels dependent on what role you're doing. And obviously being a firearms officer, for an example, or our territorial support group requires an intense, and having a baby has a big impact on, makes some things work a lot better and some things not work so well. So women are now coming in and going, okay, so you expect me to come back from maternity leave and you expect me to have this level of fitness straight away. Well, that's just not possible. So what are you going to do for me? There's a fantastic firearms officer who brought in postnatal things for women, and it's things like that that are starting to change the culture. We've had our first female commissioner recently, and talking from the Metropolitan Police point of view, we've got a lot more female chief constables now who are sort of saying, okay, like other people have said, you've identified that there's a problem for women. What are you doing about it? We're very much linked in with the he for she side of things, with having male allies. We've actually got in the Met a Women in Firearms attachment, which has been created and is run by really fantastic men who want more females in, who want more inclusivity. And I guess it's kind of that sort of ripple effect. The Casey review obviously had a huge impact on policing, and it had a great impact on the people in policing. And I think a lot of women suddenly turned around and were in that very, you know, well, that's it. You know, I've had enough of this. We're not putting up with this anymore. And you definitely are seeing more women sitting there and going, what did you just say? In the canteens. And actually men are as well, because a lot of the problem has always been silence, right? It's always been, or, you know, I mean, I remember when I was on team, I had 8 years on team as a PC, and I went down, it was the beginning of our shift, and there was a probationer, very young, and she was ironing a load of shirts. And I went down and I said, what on earth are you doing? You know, you've got to be on parade in, 10 minutes. This is not the time to be ironing, getting all your shirts ironed. There's a time for that. And she said, I'm ironing. A couple of the blokes asked me if I'd iron their shirts for them. So, you know, and in that circumstance, you know, I had a decision to make, and I went up and, you know, hell hath no fury and all that in the canteen at the men. And we are seeing more of that happening now, and you are far more supported. You know, this difficult woman trope that we've all heard, you know, well, call me difficult. Someone said it the other day, actually, or someone said that that they thought you were quite difficult, but I think you're all right. And actually, I saw that as quite a compliment. You know, if you're being difficult, then in my job, certainly you're doing something right, and you're challenging. And I think that's the more people see, oh, she did that, she spoke up about that, and you know, some of the senior officers probably wince every time they see me in a meeting, and I put my hand up on Teams. But you know, once the junior people start seeing that, and actually also I've had some senior females in policing, far more senior to me, say, I can't believe that you said that. I can't believe that you were that brave. And I've said, but it's not about being brave. It's about doing the right thing. It's about saying the right thing. And you know, obviously we can't. As Gareth said, some things you would want to maybe deal with in a different way, but we are, you know, we do have, you know, rules. But it's just about making sure that you do challenge those things, and we've still got a really long way to go, you know, in policing as a rule. But I do feel like now people are really saying, you know, we don't like even saying his name, but you know, Wayne Couzens and all of that happened. A lot of men and women, well, I'm not going to say a lot, I'm going to say the vast majority of men and women in policing said this, we will never let this happen again, and are starting to challenge those little red flags that quite often grow.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. That was really interesting. Karen, you said at the beginning that your part of the NHS, your type of medicine was new. So does that mean that cultural change hasn't been necessary because emergency medicine sort of got it cracked from the outset?
Let me think. No. I just think as a specialty, we tend to have a slightly different approach. Don't know whether I should share this, but we're actually, once upon a time we heard that the emergency physicians in the hospital are like the PE teachers of the school. Okay, so you can kind of understand the do you know what I mean? The similarity, I suppose. Like, is it a real specialty or not? You know, it's not like a traditional surgical specialty with, you know, white coats and, you know, archaic kind of structures and stuff. We are definitely a lot more flexible. We do a little bit of everything. We're probably the last generalists. We're the people that everybody else relies on. So we haven't got it all right, but we tend to have that much more of a, inclusive approach. Mm-hmm. We are progressive in terms of change because things can change on the shop floor literally at a moment's notice. You see, we have this, you know, our interface is public facing, and you see people at their most vulnerable, so we tend to be more compassionate. Other compassionate doctors are available, but we tend to be more compassionate just because that's just the nature of what we do. We also have a huge interface with the rest of the hospital. There probably isn't a department in the hospital that we don't have some sort of relationship with or partnership with. So we're a very broad church, but we're also very flexible. So we haven't got it all right, but we kind of see it as ourselves as, well, if you're having a bad day, then I'm going to be kind to you as well. Yes. And we try to reflect that attitude to everyone we meet, whether it's the public or whether it's internally.
Yeah. Really interesting. So it's also just reflecting, we've got 3 sectors here that are very public facing, where you were saying earlier about investors driving change. I guess on one level we are your investors in healthcare, policing and railways. So cultural change in the railway, have we seen any significant change and improvements there? You mentioned some of the programmes that Women in Rail were doing.
There's lots of programs. Obviously, you know, I've worked in the corporate offices, and with the work that I've done with the employee networks, I've heard of some of the things that take place on that operational level, which some of it is a nightmare, but there is a lot of work being done to mitigate that and to understand what's going on and what are the underlying causes of that. But with the culture change, that's obviously the hardest thing to change because it's ingrained in the DNA of the organisation. But there's some really, really good work for retaining our women. So, you know, we mentioned earlier on around menopausal conditions. You know, we've done toolkits, you know, at Network Rail, and we've also done inclusive leadership courses for our managers so that they understand how they can properly support the women. So it's trying to just create that culture to retain the women. The women want to actually stay there. We've also, I think was mentioned earlier on, we've done some inclusive PPE work because, you know, the PPE was, you know, wasn't, you know, we would say no more. So it's really good that our Inspire Gender Network worked really closely with our operational women to understand what is it that you need, what is it that we can do to improve your conditions. And we've also worked extensively with charities on period poverty because, you know, let's face it, if you're a frontline lady and, you know, you're on your cycle, you need to be able to be in comfortable facilities that you can feel, you know, that you can say no more. Do you know what I mean? So what it is, we've worked quite extensively on that to try and make women feel that they, you know, that they're being included and that they can be comfortable to do their job and be their best self every day. So those have been some initiatives that we've done in Network Rail, and these have been sort of galvanised with the Women in Rail, so where we've put on national events, spreading it across our supply chain and saying we are the example. We would like to help you, help us, and help across the industry to say these are the things that we need to do in order to help the environment for our women and to retain them. So it's an ambitious target. So I've got some stats again, you know, which I've written down somewhere. So at Network Rail, the ambitious target is to get to 26% by 2030, and we are currently at, yeah, that's it. So Network Rail 2019, it was 17.3%, and to get to 26% by 2024. So that is a very ambitious target, but they're working really hard to get to that target. So with all of these initiatives and so much more to talk about to be able to retain women.
Great.
But I'd just also like to add, because we've sort of touched on it, is how we can get the women in, you know, get more women in. And I think we have to be a little bit bold about our approach. And it's sort of probably a bit similar to what Gareth said in as much as just going straight for it and being very bold. I thought your statement was quite bold in some of them. Some of it's like, I'll have to have a little chat with you in the break, you know. But it's around having open days. So open days only for girls, you know, which, you know, I don't know if we're allowed to do that or if anyone else has done that. But, you know, that's the best way to get, you know, women or potentially those sort of future workforce within the organisation. And I think that would be a really good way to start. So I know we do open days and career days and all of that, and sometimes we start at age 14. But if we start earlier and just have open days for girls, I think that's a great approach to get them in. And then we're working on the culture piece.
There's also such power, isn't there? And if you can see it, you can be it. I really believe that. I really believe that, you know, if you, like, for example, I've only recently come off the front line and I'm now, probably be called a pink and fluffy role. But, you know, I had all of my children, my oldest is 8, my youngest is 2, and I had all of them while I was on the front line of policing. And, you know, that a lot of people would look and go, my God, you know, and it's not, it is possible, you know, and I always say things like in policing, and it's probably the same, it's not easy. I despise it when people go, oh, it's really easy, you know, look at me, I'm a mother and I'm doing all of this. It's not easy, it's really hard, but it's possible. And, you know, when I look up and I see people, like we've got one of our assistant commissioners, Louisa Rolfe, you know, I look at her and I'm like, wow, I can, you know, if I can see it, I could be it. And there'll be young black girls looking at Dr. Alison Hidari, one of the most senior female in policing from a minority, and they'll look at her and go, wow, I can see it, so why can't I be it, you know? And I think that the more that, you know, you have stuff like this where you've got these senior women coming up, we've got this great male allyship, it's definitely going to be a reason. You know, people look at Sharon and all the amazing things that she's done around the culture fusion and things. And well, I haven't got a network like that in my company, but you know what? Actually, I could probably set that up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I just think that we just need to be more open and, you know, show ourselves off a bit more, to be honest.
So lots to think about there in terms of visibility of female leadership driving the attractiveness of the sectors in which we work. I'm now going to open it up to questions in the room and on Slido. Has anybody got any questions?
Hi, my name is Yulia Kilko. I'm National Grid, co-chair of Women in National Grid. It's great listening to you talking about different issues, that you're from different industries, but we have the same issues essentially. And allyship, I think, is one of those that's, you know, it's cross-sector. So in National Grid, we're looking how we can grow our allyship base and how we can support them as well, so that, you know, we can support each other. But quite often we have somebody who comes up and says, well, I want to be an ally, what do I do?
Yeah.
So the first part of the question is, how do you grow your allyship base in your organizations? And second is, what do you say to your allies? How can they support you? Thank you.
I'm happy to just quickly say
absolutely.
that what we did in Network Rail. So we basically, and it's while I was chairing in Culture Fusion, the employee network, we created our allyship toolkit, as simple as that. So we went out to our allies, because especially with the death of George Floyd, we had an influx of people who wanted to help, but didn't actually know what to do. What can I do to help? And so we devised and created the ally toolkit so that people felt comfortable with being an effective ally. And it was simple things like listening, not listening, you know, actively listening, because, you know, a lot of the times we don't really listen properly. We're thinking about the next thing that we're going to say. But actively listen, giving your, you know, your person a space to speak about what is affecting them, and doing that reciprocal thing of how you can help. So happy to share our toolkit, because it's out there to, you know, that if you wanted to create your own for your organisation, that we can do that. But it's, again, it's allies are scared in case they may say something that offends somebody. And, you know, as long as you're not saying something with intent, you just want to help. So don't be frightened to make mistakes. I make mistakes, we all make mistakes, as long as you're not doing it intentional. But that is one of the things that I can share with you if you like.
And just to add, it's quite interesting looking at allies, and I love saying allies because it sounds like we're socialists going for one common goal. Because we work in former communist states as well, we use champions now instead of allyship, just in case you have to work in a jurisdiction where allyship brings up some negative thoughts. So looking at the board, for example, they set the strategy. If we can have more and more male champions or male allies at board level, fantastic, because that means that they're going to consider so much of even their own unconscious bias in rebuilding what that strategy is to co-design and co-create with women in mind or with others in mind beyond themselves. So in mining, it tends to be older white men who are on the boards, and then you might have a few others, right? But it's dominated by one general group, hence a shared lived experience, shared perspectives. So that doesn't serve us really in the long run. Hence why we have to kind of work on unlearning that, what they've learned through their culture, relearning, so helping them to rebuild and break down those unconscious and conscious biases that have been built up as part of their learning, which is necessary, right? So that goes back to how do we also support our male champions, empower them or enable them to become actual allies, actual champions. And then we have the champions from the workforce, or frontline workers, that's the word they use, the frontline workers, in the sense that we have a big issue with discrimination, bullying, sexual harassment, etc., in the mining sector on site. We're in jurisdictions from DRC to, I mentioned South Africa, to Mongolia, where cultural differences, but also the challenges of being a woman in jurisdictions where you're not traditionally supposed to have women operating. I think we still have 60 countries where women are not allowed on mines, and a few countries in the past 5 years who have actually said, okay, now women can work on mines. One of which is in Mali. I mean, now no one can mine in Mali at the moment, but one of which is in Mali, and that was through women in mining conversation with the mining company and the government supporting that. But we had to get the men in government, we had to get the men on board from the ground level, because they're the ones who are enabling and who are going to enable an environment that will allow for women to not only enter, but to stay. So we had to work on breaking down the cultural and social norms in order to build them back up to bring women into that culture of mining. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of the culture, and I think culture, we need to really talk about that and bringing male champions into that new culture and defining it together. One thing that you did mention about reaching young people open days. One thing that WIM UK has is relationships with universities. So we have WIM UK chapters in different universities, and they can support in convening these open days, because they're right there. They're young people really engaging and gathering and galvanizing everyone else. And you mentioned visibility, and that's exactly why we have this book, the WIM 100, because they're women who are custodians, custodial workers, so janitors in the office, doing incredible things that no one ever think about highlighting around building women in their community and bringing them into the mining industry where they would have not had opportunities. And these are women who can't read, can't write, but they want to be engaged. So visibility of the amazing things that women are doing in our respective sectors, and bringing others outside of our sectors into the business to really hone in on why women, and why join the industry, and why make it a more inclusive space.
Great. And really, I would just add that it's not just male allies, so women can be allies as well, very strong, effective allies, and hidden figures.
Yes.
So
allies and champions as well. Great. Any more questions from the room? Elizabeth.
Thank you. I'm Elizabeth Baxter, a board member at Powerful Women, and I'm so inspired by everything you're all doing, so thank you. I wanted to ask if you have seen someone go on a journey of not believing in the benefits of diversity and inclusion, and what you saw were the most impactful factors that allowed them to really shift their mindset to believe in this cause. Thank you.
That's a really good question. Do you want to start with this?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. Thank you. I had a very interesting conversation with what I would class as a male ally colleague. I work in a very kind of inclusive consultant body. We all work equally. We all understand each other. We have really good working relationships. And my male colleagues are all, allies. And then I had a very interesting conversation with one of them about the gender pay gap. And we had to highlight that actually we could be born next door to each other on the same day. We could go through medical school together. We could become parents on the same day, both be doctors. And from that moment on, he will earn more than I will. And it was like a light bulb suddenly went off in his head, because he just had never, as positive as he was and as championing as he was, he didn't really understand until you could actually look at that scenario. And how can that be? But we all get paid the same. It's like, no, we don't. No, we don't. As a boy, the roles that you will choose will be different than the roles that I will choose or I will be designated, because yours will pay more and mine won't. There's much more chance that I will work less than full-time, at least for a period, because I've had children. You probably won't, and all the rest of it. And all of these things all add into, my responsibilities at home are, I turn up to work for the rest sometimes, because home is home and all the rest of it. And I said, but, a lot of my male colleagues come to work with a lunch pack ready-made for them and with perfectly ironed scrubs and all the rest of it, but I'm the one making the lunch pack and doing the scrubs for myself and stuff. So there's all of these factors all at play, but as open-eyed as my colleague was, and as lovely as he was, he'd never really appreciated until you can actually describe that story. Yeah. And this is, I think a lot of the answers to these questions are in that qualitative, what actually happens to me or you in that situation, So I hope that answers your question.
That's very good. Jennifer, did you have anything?
I think something that I've said, I do a lot around sort of maternity and things like that. And I do think that, obviously there's lots of stuff in the press around maternity services and things like that. But I think for a long time, recently, women having babies is just this thing that we do, and then we go back, to work. And I try, and some of my male colleagues are like this. And I think we talking about, the absolute destruction that is having a baby, do you know what I mean? Whether that is, whatever it is, the destruction that it causes to you, menstruation, menopause, all of these sort of things. For so long, they've just been things that we just get on with. And I think, like you said, I've spoken to some fantastic men who are really supportive of women, but have still got that sort of thing in their head where, she's had a baby, she's back to work now, she's had a holiday. That's what I was, how did you enjoy your holiday off, and all of that. But actually by talking to them and saying, well, actually, I was on crutches at the end of my third baby because my pelvis separated, and they're like, what? This act of having a baby has always been this very much like Earth Mother thing. And actually, I think sometimes it is just really changing people's perspectives, that actually coming back to work, whatever your role is actually, really talking about those really, I had really severe postnatal depression after my children. It's not just a case of if you have what people would call a normal birth, that you are just going to pop back to work and everything's going to be grand. And, and it's just having those really, that's why I always say to people, talk about, if you've got bad periods, talk about them to people, because they're not going away. They're not something that's just popped up. That's things that we have to deal with. If we're going through the menopause, like Baroness Verma said, talk about those things, because that's where you're going to get the real allyship, because that's when there's a group of blokes around the canteen talking about, she's off again, pregnancy-related sickness. Someone could go, well, actually, that can be really serious. You can end up in hospital about it. And it's just having those I think those sort of conversations, really.
Well, I'm afraid I've got to bring this session to an end now, but can I just thank my really, really inspiring set of panellists with some great stories. Really, really inspirational, both inspiring stories, but also lots of practical suggestions about how they've been able to introduce change in their sectors. Now we're going to break for lunch. Lunch is served in 2 different rooms, so there are 2 doors apparently to Kew, on the left-hand side there, and at the back, down at the back as well. And then this afternoon we have workshops, which you will already have signed up to, that start at 3 p.m, and you can see those on the board. Thank you very much, everybody.